While she was in the hospital fighting for her life, he was enjoying extravagant trips with his mistress elsewhere, thinking his betrayal would go unnoticed. But in court, he discovered a devastating truth that made his bones tremble. Amber Wright stared at the bathroom mirror, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across her face. The headache had returned, sharper this time, a knife's edge behind her right eye. She gripped the edge of the sink as another wave of dizziness swept over her. 38 was too young to feel this broken. "Alex," she called out, her voice bouncing off the marble tiles. No answer. The house echoed with that particular emptiness that told her she was alone again. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 3:17 a.m. when she heard the front door close downstairs. Amber remained motionless in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the familiar pattern. Shoes off, briefcase down, the clink of keys in the ceramic bowl she'd made in that pottery class 5 years ago. Alexander's footsteps were careful, measured, a man trying not to be heard. She closed her eyes and pretended to sleep as he entered their bedroom. "Working late again?" she asked, not bothering to feign grogginess. Alexander froze momentarily before continuing to undress. "Jesus, Amber, you scared me." His voice carried none of the warmth it once had. "The Fells Point development is a nightmare. The contractor keeps missing deadlines." The lie hung between them, as tangible as the scent of unfamiliar perfume that entered the room with him. "It's the third time this week," she said. "That's the price of success, babe." He disappeared into the bathroom. The shower started running almost immediately. Amber turned away, pulling the duvet tighter around her shoulders. When had his ambition become an impenetrable wall between them? She thought back to their beginning, 12 years earlier, when Baltimore was still new to both of them. 2011, Federal Hill, Baltimore. "This one," Alexander said, standing in the empty living room of what would become their first home. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating floating dust particles like tiny stars. "It's the one," Amber laughed, spinning around the hardwood floors. "We can't afford this." "It's Federal Hill." Alexander caught her mid-spin, his blue eyes alight with that determination she would come to know so well. "We will. I have 3 projects lined up, and the Harbor East development is going to change everything." He kissed her then, and she believed every word. "We're going to build something amazing here, Amber. Together." They were younger then. She fresh out of her master's program in art history, he a hungry young developer with connections and charm to spare. Baltimore was their canvas. Their wedding had been small but perfect at the sculpture garden at the Baltimore Museum of Art. She remembered how he'd looked at her that day, like she was the masterpiece among the sculptures. "You're the best investment I'll ever make," he'd whispered during their first dance. The memory dissolved as Amber swallowed another pill for her headache. The kitchen of their Guilford mansion, the home that was supposed to be the culmination of their shared dream, felt sterile and foreign. When had they stopped eating breakfast together? When had his voice lost that eager edge when he spoke to her? Her phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Coffee at 10, need to vent about night shift drama." Amber smiled weakly. At least some things remained constant. Her friendship with Melissa Santos had survived 3 hospitals, 2 boyfriends, and one particularly disastrous blind date that they still joked about. They'd met when Amber was curating a healing arts exhibition at Johns Hopkins, where Melissa worked as a charge nurse in the emergency department. "Perfect. Daily grind in an hour," Amber replied. The harborfront coffee shop was bustling when Amber arrived. Melissa's dark curls were visible through the window, her scrubs exchanged for jeans and a Ravens sweatshirt. Seeing her friend, tired but somehow always vibrant, brought a genuine smile to Amber's face. "You look like hell," Melissa said by way of greeting, pushing a latte across the table. "And I say that with all the medical authority I can muster." Amber sank into the chair. "Thanks for sugarcoating it. Please, you've seen me after a triple shift during flu season. We're past sugarcoating." Melissa's smile faded as she studied Amber's face. "Seriously though, what's going on? You're pale, and those headaches you mentioned last week, they're getting worse, aren't they?" Amber sipped her coffee, the warmth failing to reach the cold spot that had taken residence in her chest. "It's nothing, stress probably." "Uh-huh. And these stress headaches, they come with dizziness, nausea?" "Sometimes." Amber shifted uncomfortably. "It's fine. I've just been overworking myself with the new exhibition." Melissa's expression made it clear she wasn't buying it. The migration exhibition. You've been planning that for months. That's not new stress. She leaned forward. Is it Alex? The question hit like a physical blow. Amber stared out at the harbor, where tourist boats were beginning their morning routes. He's just busy. The Harborview Residences project is taking everything he has right now. The excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. Right. So busy he couldn't make it to your gallery opening last month, the one you've been working toward for 3 years? Melissa's directness was one of the qualities Amber valued most in her friend, usually. Travis was there, Amber said, referring to Alexander's business partner, representing the company, and looking shifty as hell every time your name came up. Melissa raised an eyebrow. I'm not stupid, Amber. Something's going on with them. Travis Henderson had been Alexander's right hand since they founded Wright & Henderson Development 7 years ago. Once a regular at their dinner parties and holiday gatherings, Travis had become increasingly scarce in recent months. When Amber did see him, he couldn't seem to maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. Travis is just Travis. You know how awkward he gets in social settings. This was different. He looked guilty. Melissa reached across the table, her hand covering Amber's. Listen to me as your friend and as a medical professional. You need to see a doctor about these headaches, and you need to figure out what's happening with your husband. Amber withdrew her hand, a flash of irritation cutting through the fatigue. I don't need another person telling me what to do, Mel. I get enough of that from Alexander. Does he, though? Tell you what to do? Because it seems to me like he's barely around to tell you anything. The truth of it stung. The Alexander who had once consulted her about every business decision, who had valued her eye for design and sense of space in his early projects, now departed each morning before she woke and returned long after she'd gone to bed. I should go, Amber said, gathering her bag. I have a meeting with a potential donor for the exhibition. Melissa sighed but didn't push further. Just promise me you'll make an appointment for those headaches, for my peace of mind, if nothing else. I promise, Amber lied. The Baltimore Museum of Art had been Amber's sanctuary for the past 8 years. As associate curator of contemporary art, she'd built a reputation for exhibitions that challenged perspectives while remaining accessible. The soaring ceilings and clean lines of the galleries had always felt more like home than anywhere else. Today, though, even the familiar walls of her office couldn't contain her unease. The budget spreadsheet for the migration exhibition blurred before her eyes as another headache built behind her temples. Amber, you okay? Daniel, her assistant curator, stood in the doorway, concern evident in his expression. Fine, she said automatically, straightening in her chair. Just reviewing the installation costs for the Gonzalez pieces. Daniel didn't look convinced, but knew better than to press. The director wants to see you when you have a moment. Something about the gala speaker. The museum's annual fundraising gala was just weeks away. In previous years, Alexander had been instrumental in securing sponsors through his business connections. This year, he'd barely acknowledged when she mentioned it. As she made her way to the director's office, Amber passed the East Wing Gallery, where her first major exhibition had debuted. Alexander had surprised her that opening night, filling the space with white roses, her favorite. He'd been so proud, introducing her to everyone as the visionary behind it all. When had that pride turned to indifference? The sun was setting when Amber pulled into the driveway of their Guildford home, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Alexander's Audi was conspicuously absent. Again. Inside, she kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of red wine, the persistent headache making her movements cautious. Their house, a restored 1920s colonial with 5 bedrooms that had once represented their plans for a family, felt cavernous and cold. Amber settled at the kitchen island, opening her laptop to review emails. Out of habit, she logged into their joint account to pay the monthly bills. The familiar routine stuttered as she noticed an unfamiliar charge. $2,879 at the Four Seasons Baltimore, dated 2 weeks ago. During a week, Alexander had supposedly been in Philadelphia for meetings. Her finger hovered over the transaction. A business expense, perhaps? But Alexander had a separate corporate card for Wright & Henderson expenses. This was their personal account. Before she could investigate further, her phone rang. Alexander's face flashed on the screen, a photo from 3 years ago, his arm around her shoulders on a sailing trip to Annapolis. They looked happy. Had they been? "Hey," she answered, striving for normalcy. "I'll be late again," he said without preamble. Don't wait up. Alex, we need to talk about... I can't right now, Amber. I'm heading into a meeting with potential investors. The Harborview deal is hanging by a thread. She pressed her fingers against her forehead, where the pain was intensifying. Fine, but when you get home, gotta go. Love you. The words were perfunctory, a habit rather than a sentiment. The line went dead before she could respond. Amber stared at the phone, then back at the hotel charge on her screen. With a sudden determination, she dialed the Four Seasons. Good evening, Four Seasons, Baltimore. How may I direct your call? This is Amber Wright, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. My husband, Alexander Wright, stayed with you recently. There seems to be a discrepancy with the charges, and I need to verify the dates of his stay. A brief pause. Of course, Mrs. Wright, let me check our system. The clicking of keys. Yes, Mr. Wright was with us from the 14th through the 16th, a Harborview suite. The 14th through the 16th, when Alexander was supposedly in Philadelphia. Was anyone else registered to the room? The question emerged before she could reconsider. Another pause, longer this time. I'm afraid I can't provide that information over the phone, Mrs. Wright, for privacy reasons. But the hesitation told her everything. Thank you, Amber said, ending the call. The glass of wine sat untouched as she stared into the darkening kitchen. She opened the browser on her laptop and typed Alexander Wright, Baltimore developer, into the search bar, then clicked on Images, something she hadn't done in years. Why would she need to Google her own husband? Photos from business journals and real estate publications filled the screen. Alexander at groundbreaking ceremonies, at charity galas, at ribbon cuttings. His face had acquired new lines since their wedding day, but he'd aged well, salt and pepper at the temples only enhancing his executive presence. She was about to close the browser when a recent image caught her eye. Alexander at some event she didn't recognize, his arm around a woman who definitely wasn't her. The caption read, Developer Alexander Wright and Marketing Director Vanessa Cole at the Harbor East Business Association dinner. Vanessa Cole. The name was vaguely familiar. A new hire at Wright & Henderson, someone Alexander had mentioned in passing months ago. In the photo, Alexander was looking at Vanessa, not with the professional distance of a boss, but with an intensity Amber recognized all too well. It was how he used to look at her. The room tilted suddenly, the edges of her vision darkening. Amber gripped the counter as the pain in her head exploded into blinding agony. The wineglass toppled, crimson liquid spreading across the white marble like blood. Her last coherent thought before consciousness slipped away was that the red stain would be impossible to remove, just like the stain of betrayal spreading through her life. Mrs. Wright, can you hear me? The voice seemed to come from very far away. Amber struggled to open her eyes, the fluorescent light sending fresh pain through her skull. She's responsive, blood pressure stabilizing. A different voice, clinical and efficient. Amber blinked, the world gradually coming into focus. White walls, beeping machines, the unmistakable antiseptic smell of a hospital room. What happened? Her voice was a rasp. A face appeared above her, a woman in scrubs with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. You collapsed in your home. Your security system alerted emergency services when it detected a fall and no movement. The smart home features Alexander had insisted on installing last year. At least something of his was looking out for her. I'm Dr. Eleanor Weiss, Neurology, the woman continued. You're at Johns Hopkins. We've run some initial tests, but we need to do more to determine what caused your collapse. Memory returned in flashes. The hotel charge, the phone call, the photo of Alexander with another woman. My husband, Amber managed. Has anyone called my husband? Dr. Weiss nodded. Emergency contact information was in your phone. They've been trying to reach him. As if on cue, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Weiss, I have Mr. Wright on the line. The doctor stepped away, returning moments later with a phone. Your husband, she said, handing it to Amber. Alex? Amber's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Amber, what the hell happened? Alexander's tone conveyed more annoyance than concern. I'm in the middle of dinner with the zoning commissioner. I collapsed. I'm at Hopkins. The words were flat, factual. A pause. Are you okay? What are they saying? They don't know yet. They need to run tests. She waited, expecting him to say he was on his way. Christ, Amber, your timing is incredible. The background noise suggested he'd stepped away from a table, but hadn't left whatever restaurant he was in. "Look, I can't leave right now. This meeting has been planned for weeks. The entire Harborview project depends on it." Tears pressed behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Of course. The project comes first. Don't be dramatic. She'll be there as soon as I wrap this up. A couple of hours tops." Dr. Weiss was watching her with a frown, likely noting the spike in her heart rate on the monitor. "Fine," Amber said. "Do what you need to do." "I'll be there soon," Alexander promised, his voice softening slightly. "Just hang tight." The line went dead, and Amber handed the phone back to Dr. Weiss, avoiding her gaze. "We're going to admit you for observation," the doctor said after a moment. "The CT scan showed some concerning results that we need to investigate further." "Concerning how?" Dr. Weiss pulled up a chair beside the bed. "There's evidence of increased intracranial pressure. It could explain the headaches and dizziness you reported to the paramedics. We need to do an MRI and some additional blood work to determine the cause." The clinical terms washed over Amber, oddly less frightening than the thought of facing whatever was happening alone. "Is it serious?" she asked. "It's something we need to address quickly," Dr. Weiss replied carefully. "Is there anyone else we can call for you? Family? A friend?" Amber thought of Melissa, probably in the middle of her shift somewhere in this same hospital. "My friend Melissa Santos. She's a nurse here in the ER." Dr. Weiss nodded. "I'll have someone find her." Left alone in the sterile room, Amber stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles to distract herself from the fear taking root in her chest. 39 tiles. One for each year of her life, plus one for the unknown future stretching before her. The door burst open and Melissa rushed in, still in scrubs, her face a mask of professional calm that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You stubborn idiot," she said, taking Amber's hand. "When I said see a doctor, I didn't mean like this." Amber managed a weak smile. Always doing things the hard way. Melissa checked the monitors with the practiced eye of someone who understood what they meant. "Where's Alexander?" "Important dinner, he'll be here later." Amber couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Melissa's expression darkened. "Of course. God forbid his wife's health emergency interfere with his business." "Mel!" "No. Don't defend him. Not now." Melissa pulled the visitor's chair closer. "What did Weiss tell you?" "Something about intracranial pressure. They need to do more tests." Melissa nodded, her professionalism temporarily overriding her anger. "Eleanor Weiss is the best neurologist in the hospital. You're in good hands." "I found something, Mel," Amber said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Before I collapsed, Alex has been lying about his business trips. And there's a woman." The admission hung in the air between them. Saying it aloud made it real in a way that seeing it on a screen hadn't. "That son of a bitch," Melissa breathed. "I knew something was off." Before Amber could respond, orderlies arrived to transport her for the MRI. Melissa squeezed her hand. "I'll be here when you get back. And I'm off shift in an hour, so I'm staying as long as you need me." The tests took hours. The MRI, blood draws, a spinal tap that left Amber shaking with pain and fear. Through it all, her phone remained silent. No texts from Alexander. No calls. By the time she was returned to her room, night had fallen outside the hospital windows. Melissa was there as promised, but Alexander's absence was a presence of its own, a void more telling than any evidence she'd discovered earlier. "He's still not here," Amber said unnecessarily. Melissa's expression was carefully neutral. "He called the nurses' station, said he was tied up and would come first thing in the morning." The last thread of denial Amber had been clinging to snapped. Whatever excuses Alexander might offer tomorrow, whatever lies he might tell, the truth was undeniable. When she needed him most, he had chosen not to be there. Dr. Weiss returned shortly after, her face grave as she reviewed the test results. "Mrs. Wright, we've identified a mass in your frontal lobe. It's what's causing the increased pressure and your symptoms." The word hung unspoken between them. "Tumor. We need to schedule surgery as soon as possible," Dr. Weiss continued. "Tomorrow morning, ideally. I've already contacted our top neurosurgeon, Dr. Patel." Amber felt oddly calm, as if she were floating outside her body, watching the scene unfold. "Is it cancer?" "We won't know until we can biopsy the mass, but regardless, it needs to come out. The location is causing your symptoms, and the pressure will continue to increase if we don't intervene." "And if I do nothing?" Dr. Weiss's expression softened. "That's not an option I'd recommend. The pressure could cause stroke, permanent damage, or worse. Amber nodded slowly. Then I guess we do the surgery. You'll need to sign consent forms, and we'll start prep early in the morning. The procedure will take several hours. Dr. Weiss hesitated. Is your husband coming to be with you? These decisions shouldn't be made alone. He'll be here, Amber lied, the words bitter on her tongue. After Dr. Weiss left, Melissa took her hand again. I'll stay. All night if you need me to. No, Amber said, a strange clarity cutting through her fear. Go home, get some rest, I need to think. Reluctantly, Melissa agreed to leave, promising to return before the surgery. When the room was finally empty, Amber picked up her phone and called Alexander again. It went straight to voicemail. Alex, she said after the beep, they found a brain tumor. I'm having surgery tomorrow morning at 8. She paused, waiting for the tears that didn't come. I need you to be here. She ended the call and placed the phone on the bedside table. Outside her window, Baltimore's lights twinkled across the harbor, the city continuing its rhythm despite the fact that her world had just been upended, twice in one day. As midnight approached, Amber Wright lay alone in her hospital bed, staring at the door that her husband of 12 years would not walk through. The pain in her head was relentless, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, she made a promise to herself. If she survived tomorrow's surgery, Alexander would pay for his betrayal. She just had to live long enough to make it happen. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting thin strips across Amber's blanket. She hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch, her mind cycling between the tumor growing inside her skull and the betrayal growing inside her marriage. The clock on the wall showed 6:15 a.m., less than 2 hours until surgery. Her phone remained silent. A nurse entered the room, startling Amber from her thoughts. Good morning, Mrs. Wright. We need to start prep for your procedure soon. Has your husband arrived yet? He's on his way, Amber said automatically, the lie becoming easier each time she told it. The nurse nodded sympathetically. Morning traffic in Baltimore can be brutal. She began checking Amber's vitals with practiced efficiency. Doctor, Patel will be in shortly to discuss the procedure one more time before we take you down. After the nurse left, Amber picked up her phone and dialed Alexander again. Voicemail. Again. Alex, it's almost time for surgery. Please. She paused, hating the desperation in her voice. Just call me back. I need to know you're coming. Dr. Weiss arrived a few minutes later, tablet in hand. Morning, Mrs. Wright. How are you feeling? Like someone's using a jackhammer inside my skull, Amber admitted. And please call me Amber. Dr. Weiss's smile was kind but professional. The pain is from the increasing intracranial pressure. The good news is, we're going to address that today. She swiped through images on her tablet. Dr. Patel and I reviewed your MRI. The tumor is approximately 3 centimeters and located in your right frontal lobe. Is that large? Significant enough to explain your symptoms, but not so large that we can't remove it completely. Dr. Weiss sat on the edge of the bed. This location is also preferable for surgery, more accessible than if it were deeper in the brain. Amber nodded, trying to focus on the doctor's words, rather than the persistent absence of her husband. I notice your emergency contact hasn't arrived, Dr. Weiss said, her tone carefully neutral. Is there anyone else who should be here? Anyone you'd like us to update during the procedure? My friend Melissa will be here soon. Amber twisted the wedding band on her finger. My husband is unavailable. Dr. Weiss's expression remained professionally composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Concern, perhaps, or disapproval. I see. Well, I'd like to go over the consent forms with you now, if that's all right. As Dr. Weiss explained the risks of the procedure, infection, bleeding, stroke, temporary or permanent neurological damage, Amber found herself mentally calculating the odds of each complication. What were the chances that Alexander was truly stuck in unavoidable business? What were the odds that the hotel charge, the photo with Vanessa Cole, the missed calls were all innocent coincidences? Statistically improbable, just like the chances of a healthy 38-year-old woman developing a brain tumor. Amber? Dr. Weiss's voice pulled her back to the present. Did you understand everything I just explained? Yes, where do I sign? After completing the paperwork, Amber was left alone again. She picked up her phone and instead of calling Alexander, dialed a different number. Travis Henderson. Alexander's business partner sounded distracted, the background noise suggesting he was already at the office. "Travis, it's Amber Wright." A pause. "Amber, hi. Is everything okay?" "No, actually. I'm at Johns Hopkins. I collapsed last night, and they found a brain tumor. I'm having surgery in an hour." "Jesus Christ." Travis's shock sounded genuine. "I had no idea. What are they saying?" "They won't know if it's malignant until after the surgery, but regardless, they have to remove it." She took a deep breath. "Travis, I can't reach Alexander. He's not answering his phone, and he didn't come to the hospital last night." "Do you know where he is?" The silence stretched too long to be anything but damning. "Travis? Amber, He cleared his throat. "Alex left for New York yesterday afternoon. Emergency meeting with Harborview investors." "New York?" The word fell flat. "When is he due back?" Another pause. "Tomorrow evening, I think." "You think?" Her grip tightened on the phone. "He didn't tell you his exact schedule." "That's not like Alexander. Things have been chaotic lately with the project." Travis's discomfort was palpable even through the phone. "Look, I can try to reach him for you. Get him on the next flight back." "Don't bother." Amber's voice was suddenly cold. "If my husband wants to be in New York more than with his wife during brain surgery, that's his choice." "Amber, I'm sure he doesn't know how serious. I told him in a voicemail last night. Brain tumor. Surgery at 8 a.m. She cut him off. "Goodbye, Travis." She ended the call just as Melissa burst into the room, her curls wild and eyes wide with concern. I'm here. Sorry, shift change was a nightmare." Melissa dropped her bag and came to Amber's side. "How are you holding up? Did they give you the rundown on the procedure?" Dr. Weiss explained everything. Amber felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's solid presence. No sign of Alexander. Melissa's expression darkened. "That bastard. He's in New York, apparently." "According to Travis?" "New York?" Melissa practically spat the words. "When his wife is having brain surgery? Oh, that's just—" "Please," Amber interrupted, suddenly exhausted. "I can't focus on that right now. I need to get through this surgery first." Melissa visibly reined in her anger. "You're right, I'm sorry." She took Amber's hand. "What can I do? Just be here." And Amber hesitated. "If something goes wrong—" "Nothing is going to go wrong. But if it does, make sure Alexander doesn't get everything. I want you to promise me that." "Amber—" "Promise me, Mel." Melissa's eyes glistened. "I promise, but it's not going to come to that." The door opened, and a team of nurses entered to begin final preparations. Dr. Patel, the neurosurgeon, a tall, elegant woman with steady hands and confidence in every movement, introduced herself and ran through the procedure once more. "Any questions before we get started?" Dr. Patel asked, her gaze compassionate but direct. "Just one," Amber said. "When can I get back to work?" Dr. Patel smiled. "One step at a time. Let's focus on getting through today successfully." As they wheeled Amber toward the operating room, Melissa walking alongside as far as she was permitted, Amber felt a strange calm descend. Whatever happened in that OR, whether she survived or not, she knew with absolute certainty that her marriage was already dead. That knowledge, oddly enough, was liberating. The first thing Amber became aware of was the steady beeping of monitors. The second was the crushing pain in her head. The third was a warm hand holding hers. For one disoriented moment, she thought it might be Alexander. "Hey, you're awake." Melissa's voice thick with relief. "Can you hear me?" Amber tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the intubation. She managed a small nod, which sent fresh agony shooting through her skull. "Don't try to move too much," Melissa cautioned. "The surgery went well. Dr. Patel got all of the tumor. You've been out for about 6 hours. Amber blinked, her vision gradually focusing on Melissa's worried face. She tried to form a question with her eyes. "No, he's not here," Melissa answered, understanding immediately. "I called his cell multiple times. Nothing." Tears leaked from the corners of Amber's eyes, trailing down into her hair. Whether from pain or betrayal, she couldn't say. "Rest now," Melissa murmured, squeezing her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Amber drifted back into unconsciousness, where dreams of Alexander walking away from her played on endless loop. The next few days passed in a blur of pain medication, neurological checks, and fitful sleep. Dr. Weiss visited regularly, reporting that Amber's recovery was proceeding well, all things considered. The pathology results were still pending, but the surgery itself had been a success. the tumor completely removed with minimal disruption to surrounding tissue. On the second day, post-op, Amber was able to speak in short sentences. On the third day, she managed to sit up and eat solid food. On the fourth day, she took her first steps down the hospital corridor, leaning heavily on a nurse. All without any sign of Alexander. "It's been 96 hours, Amber said to Melissa on the evening of the fourth day. Her voice was stronger now, though still raspy. 4 days since my surgery, and he hasn't even called. Melissa, who had been dividing her time between her shifts and Amber's bedside, looked up from the magazine she'd been flipping through. "I know, it's unconscionable. Travis has called 3 times to check on me." Amber stared out the window at the Baltimore skyline. "He keeps saying Alexander is unreachable due to investor negotiations in New York. For 4 straight days, in 2023, that's bullshit, and Travis knows it." Amber turned to her friend. "I need you to do something for me. Name it. Go to my house and get my laptop and—" She hesitated. "I need you to go into Alexander's study and find his business calendar, the physical one he keeps in his desk drawer." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "You think he's actually keeping a record of where he really is? Alexander is many things, but disorganized isn't one of them. He writes everything down, business and otherwise." Understanding dawned on Melissa's face. "You think he's documenting his affair?" "Not explicitly, but dates, locations, those would be there. I need to see if New York was planned or if it was a convenient excuse." "I'll go tonight after my shift," Melissa promised. "Anything else?" Amber considered for a moment. "Yes. In the guest room closet, there's a box labeled Tax Documents 2020. It has cash inside, about $5,000. Alexander doesn't know about it. Why do you have secret cash stashed away?" "It was supposed to be for a surprise anniversary trip to Napa Valley," Amber said with a bitter smile. "I've been saving for months." "Oh, Amber, just bring it to me. And don't tell anyone you're doing this, especially not at the hospital. I don't want word getting back to Alexander that I'm investigating." Melissa nodded, her expression resolute. "Consider it done." Dr. Weiss arrived the next morning with a tablet in hand and guarded optimism in her eyes. "Morning, Amber. How's the pain today?" "Manageable," Amber replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. The physical pain had subsided to a dull throb. The emotional pain was another matter entirely. "Good. I have your pathology results." Dr. Weiss pulled up a chair. The tumor was a meningioma, a type that grows from the membranes covering the brain. The good news is it's benign. Relief washed over Amber. "Not cancer. Not cancer," Dr. Weiss confirmed. "These tumors are slow-growing and usually don't spread. The even better news is that Dr. Patel was able to remove it completely, which means there's an excellent chance it won't recur. So I'm going to be okay? You'll need regular follow-up MRIs to monitor for any changes, but yes, I expect you to make a full recovery." Dr. Weiss's professional demeanor softened slightly. "You're very fortunate, Amber. If you hadn't collapsed when you did, if the tumor had continued to grow undetected, the outcome could have been much worse." "Lucky me," Amber murmured. Dr. Weiss hesitated, then asked, "Still no word from your husband?" "No." "I see." The doctor made a note in her tablet. "Well, we'll need to discuss discharge planning. Given your situation, I'm concerned about sending you home alone. The first few weeks after brain surgery require careful monitoring." "I won't be alone," Amber said quickly. "My friend Melissa has already offered to stay with me." Dr. Weiss nodded. "Good. If all continues to go well, we can look at discharge in another day or 2. In the meantime, I'm going to order a physical therapy consult and reduce your pain medication slightly to see how you tolerate it." After Dr. Weiss left, Amber shuffled to the bathroom, grimacing at her reflection in the mirror. Half her head was shaved, a curved line of staples tracing the path of the surgeon's incision. Dark circles underscored her eyes, and her skin was sallow from days without sunlight. She barely recognized herself. Perhaps that was fitting. The woman she had been, trusting, devoted, willfully blind, was gone. Melissa arrived that afternoon, laptop and cash in tow. "I got everything you asked for," she said, lowering her voice even though they were alone in the room, "including Alexander's calendar. And there's definitely no New York trip scheduled. The last entry was for Tuesday, dinner with the zoning commissioner at a Zoomy." The night, Amber had collapsed. The dinner, Alexander hadn't wanted to leave. What about his computer? Any emails about a trip? Melissa shook her head. I couldn't access his laptop. Passcode protected. Amber nodded slowly, wincing at the movement. That's fine. The calendar is enough for now. She took her own laptop from Melissa. I need to check something else. She logged into their joint bank account, navigating to the recent transactions. The Four Seasons charge she'd discovered before her collapse was still there, but now she noticed other patterns. Restaurants she'd never been to, wine shops in neighborhoods Alexander had no reason to visit, a jewelry store purchase from 3 months ago that she'd never received. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward Melissa. The Sagamore Pendry Hotel, 8 times in the last 6 months. Melissa's eyes widened. That's one of the most expensive hotels in Baltimore. And it's not like you two need a hotel, you live here. Exactly. Amber scrolled through more transactions. Here's another one. Dinner at Charleston on Valentine's Day. Alexander told me he was in D.C. that night for meetings. This is... Melissa struggled for words. This is systematic, Amber. These aren't impulsive decisions. He's been planning these... encounters. Planning, and not even bothering to hide the evidence, Amber said, her voice hardening. He thinks I'm too trusting or too stupid to check our accounts. What are you going to do? Amber closed the laptop, a plan already forming in her mind. First, I need more information, concrete evidence, not just suspicious charges. And then I'm going to destroy him, Amber said simply. But I need help. 2 days later, Amber was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions for follow-up care. Melissa drove her home, the spring sunshine doing little to warm Amber's growing coldness toward her absent husband. The house was exactly as she'd left it nearly a week ago, including the wine stain on the kitchen counter where she'd collapsed. No sign that Alexander had been there, no evidence of concern for his wife's well-being. What a bastard, Melissa muttered, helping Amber to the guest bedroom. They'd agreed it would be easier than navigating the master suite upstairs during her recovery. He hasn't even called the house to see if you're alive. That's because he knows I'm not dead, Amber said, settling carefully onto the bed. Travis would have told him if I hadn't survived the surgery. Anything more than that, my actual condition, my prognosis, he clearly doesn't care about. Melissa unpacked Amber's hospital bag, arranging medications on the nightstand. So what's this plan of yours? I need proof of the affair, incontrovertible evidence that will hold up in court. Court? You're thinking divorce. What would you call it when your husband abandons you during brain surgery to be with another woman? Melissa nodded grimly. Fair point, but getting that kind of evidence, we could stake out the Pendry, but that seems... No, we need someone professional. Amber reached for her phone. I made some calls from the hospital. There's a private investigator who specializes in infidelity cases, former Baltimore PD detective. You've been busy, Melissa said, impressed. Brain surgery gives you plenty of time to think. Amber dialed the number she'd saved. Mr. Reed, this is Amber Wright. We spoke yesterday about my situation. Marcus Reed had a voice like gravel, weathered by 20 years on the force and another 10 in private practice. Mrs. Wright, you're out of the hospital, I take it? Yes, just got home. I'd like to meet as soon as possible. I can be there in an hour if that works for you. Perfect, and Mr. Reed, discretion is paramount. My husband has connections throughout Baltimore. Understood. I'll be in an unmarked vehicle. After ending the call, Amber closed her eyes, the exertion of the day catching up with her. I need to rest before he arrives. I'll wake you, Melissa promised. And Amber, I'm proud of you. Most people would be falling apart right now. Amber's smile was thin. Oh, I'm falling apart, Mel. I'm just making sure Alexander falls harder. Marcus Reed arrived precisely on time, a solidly built man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the alert eyes of someone who missed nothing. He declined Melissa's offer of coffee, placing a worn leather briefcase on the coffee table. Mrs. Wright, he said, shaking Amber's hand carefully, mindful of her condition. I appreciate you meeting so soon after your surgery. Time is essential, Mr. Reed. My husband has been gone for a week now. If his pattern holds, he'll return soon, claiming his business is concluded. Reed nodded, opening his briefcase. You mentioned on the phone that you suspect your husband is having an affair with a colleague. Vanessa Cole, correct? Yes, she's the marketing director at Wright and Henderson Development. And you have reason to believe they've been meeting at various hotels around Baltimore, primarily the Sagamore Pendry. That's what our bank statements suggest. Amber gestured to her laptop, where she'd compiled the hotel charges. I need definitive proof. Photographs, video, anything that establishes their relationship beyond reasonable doubt. Reed reviewed the statements, his expression giving nothing away. This is a good start. What about social media? Any communications between them that might suggest impropriety? I haven't been able to access Alexander's phone or personal email, but there was a photo. Amber pulled up the business association dinner image she'd found before her collapse. This is from 2 months ago. Reed studied the photo, his eyes narrowing slightly at Alexander's body language toward Vanessa. I see what you mean. This isn't how a boss typically stands with an employee. Exactly. What about her? Reed pointed to Vanessa. Any social media presence I can monitor. Instagram and LinkedIn, as far as I know. I have screenshots of her profiles. Reed made notes in a small pad. Here's how we'll proceed. I'll run surveillance on both subjects, your husband and Ms. Cole. The Pendry is actually an ideal location for my purposes. I have contacts in their security department who can provide access to footage without raising flags. He outlined his fees, steep but not unexpected, and his timeline for reporting back. Given your husband's imminent return, I suggest we begin immediately. First, monitoring his actions when he returns home, then tracking his movements when he inevitably leaves again. Do whatever it takes, Amber said. Cost isn't an issue. After Reed left, Melissa looked at Amber with concern. Are you sure about this? Once you have that kind of evidence, there's no going back. I crossed the point of no return when I woke up from brain surgery, and my husband was nowhere to be found, Amber replied. Now I just need to make sure I have the ammunition to win the war he doesn't even know is coming. Alexander returned 2 days later, arriving home just after 9 p.m. with no warning call. Amber, who had been resting in the guest bedroom, heard the front door open and tensed. Melissa had gone home to shower and change, leaving Amber alone for the first time since her discharge. Amber? Alexander's voice carried through the house. You home? Footsteps in the hallway. Then the guest room door opened. Alexander stood there, his expression a carefully composed mixture of concern and exhaustion. He wore an expensive suit, slightly rumpled from travel, his tie loosened at the neck. There you are, he said, as if he'd simply misplaced her. Travis told me you were released from the hospital. Why didn't you call me? Amber stared at him, this stranger who wore her husband's face. Why didn't you call me, or visit me, or acknowledge in any way that your wife nearly died? Alexander had the grace to look uncomfortable. The timing was terrible, I know, but the New York situation was critical. The entire Harborview project was on the line. More critical than brain surgery? Of course not, he said quickly. But by the time Travis reached me, you were already in recovery. The doctors said you were stable. I knew you were in good hands. Right, good hands, just not yours. Amber kept her voice level, conscious of Marcus Reed's advice to avoid tipping her hand. The tumor was benign, by the way, not that you asked. Alexander approached the bed cautiously. I'm sorry, Amber. I should have been there. Things have been complicated lately. Complicated. She let the word hang between them. Yes, I imagine they have been. He reached for her hand, but she subtly shifted away. How are you feeling now? You look, well, you've looked better, honestly. Brain surgery will do that to you. An awkward silence fell. Alexander glanced around the guest room, noting the medications, the glass of water, the laptop closed on the side table. You should have called me when they discharged you. I would have come home sooner. Would you? Amber met his gaze directly. Would you really, Alex? Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or irritation at being questioned. Of course. You're my wife. The title, once a source of pride for Amber, now felt like a hollow designation. A legal formality, rather than an emotional bond. I'm tired, she said, breaking eye contact. The pain medication makes me drowsy. Of course. Alexander seemed relieved at the excuse to end the conversation. I'll let you rest. We can talk more in the morning. He hesitated, then leaned down and placed a perfunctory kiss on her forehead. I'm glad you're okay, Amber, really. After he left, closing the door behind him, Amber reached for her phone and sent a text to Marcus Reed. He's back, claiming New York business trip. No acknowledgement of his absence during my surgery. Reed's response came seconds later. Surveillance in place. Will update with movements tomorrow. Amber set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, listening to Alexander moving about the house. The familiar sounds of his routine now foreign and suspect. The shower running, drawers opening and closing, his phone ringing and his voice dropping to a murmur she couldn't quite make out. She wondered if he was talking to Vanessa, updating her on the inconvenient reality of his wife's continued existence. For the first time since her diagnosis, Amber allowed herself to cry, not from sadness or fear, but from a cold, clarifying rage that crystallized her resolve. Alexander Wright had betrayed her in every way possible, and now he would pay the price. The next week established a new normal in the Wright household. Alexander returned to work, leaving early and returning late, his explanation being the backlog of tasks that had accumulated during his New York trip. He was solicitous of Amber's recovery in a detached, performative way, asking about her pain levels, making sure her prescriptions were filled, occasionally bringing home dinner from her favorite restaurants. To anyone observing from the outside, he would have appeared a concerned husband tending to his recuperating wife. But Amber noted what was missing: genuine emotional connection, real concern for her well-being, any acknowledgement of the gravity of what she'd been through. He slept in their master bedroom upstairs while Amber remained in the guest room, an arrangement he accepted with suspicious ease. They were, for all intents and purposes, polite strangers sharing a home. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed provided daily updates. Alexander's movements were methodical and predictable. Early meetings at the office, lunch with clients or Travis, late evenings that sometimes included stops at upscale bars in Harbor East. And then, on the 8th day after his return, Reed sent the text Amber had been both dreading and anticipating. Subject A, meeting Subject 5 at Pendry. Surveillance in progress. Amber's hand trembled as she replied, "Visual confirmation needed." 3 hours later, her phone pinged with an incoming email from Reed. She opened it to find a series of photographs, Alexander and Vanessa entering the hotel separately, but within minutes of each other. Alexander checking in at the front desk, the two of them entering an elevator together, his hand placed intimately at the small of Vanessa's back, and finally, most damning of all, security camera footage from the hotel hallway showing them entering a room, Alexander glancing furtively over his shoulder before closing the door behind them. Something twisted in Amber's chest as she stared at the evidence. Even though she'd known, had been certain, seeing the proof was a different kind of pain. 12 years of marriage reduced to clandestine hotel meetings and lies. Her phone rang. Reed's gravelly voice came through when she answered, "Mrs. Wright, I assume you received the files." "I did." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "There's more." Reed's tone was carefully professional. "I've been able to establish a pattern. They've been meeting at the Pendry every Tuesday and Thursday for at least the past 3 months, based on security footage archives my contact provided." 3 months? Amber closed her eyes. "What about New York? Was he actually there last week?" "Yes and no. He was in New York, but not alone. Ms. Cole accompanied him. I have confirmation from the hotel where they stayed, the Greenwich in Tribeca. They checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Wright. The final betrayal, using her name for his mistress." Amber felt something inside her harden to stone. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. This is comprehensive. There's one more thing you should know." Reed paused. "During my background investigation of Ms. Cole, I discovered some concerning financial entanglements between her and your husband's company. Transfers of funds that don't align with standard employee compensation." Amber sat up straighter. "What kind of transfers?" "Large sums moving from company accounts to offshore holdings, then filtering back to personal accounts under Ms. Cole's name. I'm not a financial investigator, but it looks like potential embezzlement or tax evasion. The implications were staggering. Not just an affair, but financial impropriety as well. Can you document this?" "I've included what I found in a secure file attached to the email, but for this level of financial investigation, you might want to consider consulting a forensic accountant and a good attorney." "I will. Thank you, Mr. Reed." After ending the call, Amber sat motionless, absorbing everything she'd learned. The affair was bad enough, a betrayal of their vows, their partnership, their history together. But if Alexander was also engaging in financial misconduct, the stakes were much higher. Melissa called an hour later, having received a cryptic text from Amber asking her to come over after her shift. She arrived with takeout from their favorite Thai place, finding Amber sitting in the dimly lit living room, laptop open before her. "What happened?" Melissa asked, setting down the food bags. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have the proof," Amber said, turning the laptop to show the damning photos. And it's worse than I thought. Melissa's expression shifted from shock to rage as she scrolled through the images. That absolute garbage human. While you're recovering from brain surgery, I swear to God I could kill him with my bare hands. That would be too merciful, Amber said, her voice unnervingly calm. I want him to suffer. I want him to lose everything. And he will, Melissa assured her. These photos alone, it's not just the affair. Reed found evidence of financial misconduct. Alexander and Vanessa may be embezzling from the company. Melissa's eyes widened. Holy shit, that's criminal. Yes, which means I need more than just a divorce attorney. I need someone who understands both aspects, the personal and the professional betrayal. Do you have someone in mind? Amber nodded. Catherine Zhang. She handled the Braddock divorce last year, the hedge fund manager whose wife took him for everything after he was caught laundering money through their charitable foundation. I remember reading about that. She got what? $500 million, and he got 15 years in federal prison. Amber's smile was cold. Catherine Zhang doesn't just win divorces. She annihilates people who deserve it. Can you afford her? I mean, I know you guys are well off, but I've been transferring small amounts from our joint account to my private one for months now, Amber admitted. Originally for that anniversary surprise. Now it'll be my retainer for Catherine. Melissa studied her friend with a mixture of concern and admiration. You've changed, Amber. A month ago, you were making excuses for Alexander's absences. Now you're planning his destruction with military precision. A month ago I didn't have a hole in my skull, Amber replied, touching the healing incision beneath her hair. Sometimes it takes having your brain exposed to finally see things clearly. She picked up her phone and dialed Catherine Zhang's office number, which she'd researched earlier that day. Zhang and Associates, answered a crisp, professional voice. This is Amber Wright. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Ms. Zhaz regarding a high-asset divorce with potential criminal complications. One moment, please. As Amber waited to be connected, she caught Melissa watching her with concern. Are you sure you're ready for this? Melissa asked quietly. Once you start down this road, I've been on this road since I woke up alone in that hospital room, Amber said, her resolve hardening with each word. Alexander made his choice. Now I'm making mine. The receptionist returned to the line. Mrs. Wright, Ms. Zhang can see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Will that work for your schedule? It's perfect, Amber replied, her gaze falling on the wedding portrait displayed on the mantel, she and Alexander smiling, blissfully unaware of where their story would lead. Absolutely perfect. Catherine Zhang's office occupied the top floor of a sleek high-rise overlooking Baltimore's inner harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the water, while modern art adorned walls painted in subtle shades of gray. The overall effect was one of restrained power, exactly the impression Amber needed from her attorney. Catherine herself was a study in controlled precision, early 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her dark hair cut in a sharp bob that framed calculating eyes. She reviewed the evidence Amber had brought, Reed's photographs, the financial documents, the timeline of Alexander's absences, without visible reaction. Brain surgery, Catherine finally said, setting down the folder. Your husband abandoned you during brain surgery to be with his mistress. Yes. And has shown minimal concern for your recovery since then. Correct. Catherine leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Wright, I don't typically comment on the moral aspects of my cases. My job is to secure the best possible financial outcome for my clients, regardless of the emotional circumstances. Amber nodded. I understand. That said, Catherine continued, what your husband has done is exceptionally callous, even by the standards I've encountered in my practice, and the potential financial misconduct adds a layer of complexity that changes our strategic approach. How so? Catherine tapped the financial records Reed had compiled. If Alexander is indeed embezzling from his own company or engaging in tax evasion with Ms. Cole's assistance, this becomes more than a divorce case. It becomes leverage. I'm listening. Maryland is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. This means the court divides marital assets fairly, not necessarily equally. Catherine's smile was thin. What constitutes fair can be quite subjective, influenced by factors such as length of marriage, contributions of each spouse, and most relevantly in your case, marital misconduct. You mean the affair? The affair, yes, but more importantly, the abandonment during a medical crisis. Judges are human, Mrs. Wright. Your husband leaving you alone during brain surgery to be with his mistress, that's the kind of detail that influences how equitable is interpreted. Catherine pulled a legal pad toward her and began writing. We'll need to act quickly but strategically. Based on what you've shared, Alexander doesn't realize you're aware of the affair or the financial irregularities. No, I've been accommodating since he returned. Good. Keep it that way for now. Catherine looked up from her notes. Maryland has a 1-year separation requirement before filing for a no-fault divorce, but we can file immediately on grounds of adultery. However, I suggest we delay filing until we've secured all our evidence, particularly regarding the financial matters. How long? 2 weeks, perhaps 3, just long enough to build an irrefutable case. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. In the meantime, I'm going to connect you with a forensic accountant who specializes in high net worth divorces. We need to identify all marital assets, including any that Alexander may have attempted to hide. He handles most of our finances, Amber admitted. I know we're comfortable, but I don't know exactly how much we're worth. That's not uncommon, Catherine assured her. But it stops today. From this moment forward, you need to become an expert on your own financial situation. The meeting continued for another hour, with Catherine outlining the process ahead, gathering financial records, documenting Alexander's pattern of behavior, preparing for the inevitable confrontation when he was served with divorce papers. One last thing, Mrs. Wright, Catherine said as Amber prepared to leave. Your recovery must remain a priority throughout this process. Brain surgery is serious, and stress can impede healing. I need you sharp and healthy. I understand. No, I don't think you do. Catherine's tone softened slightly. I've seen clients become so consumed by righteous anger that they neglect their own well-being. That serves no one, least of all you. Amber nodded, recognizing the wisdom in Catherine's words. I'll be careful. Good, because what we're planning isn't just a divorce. Catherine's eyes glinted with professional determination. It's a reckoning. Edward Finch, the forensic accountant Catherine recommended, arrived at Amber's home the following day, a small, precise man with wire-rimmed glasses and a methodical approach that belied the aggressive intelligence behind his mild manner. Financial infidelity often precedes the physical kind, he explained as they sat at the dining room table, surrounded by the documents Amber had gathered. People who hide relationships frequently hide money first. With Finch's guidance, Amber began to untangle the web of Alexander's finances, a task made easier by her husband's continued absence and his assumption that she remained ignorant about business matters. I'm looking for unusual patterns, Finch explained, scanning through bank statements. Large withdrawals, transfers to unfamiliar accounts, new investment vehicles established in the past year or so. The picture that emerged over the next several days was troubling. Beyond the personal accounts Amber already knew about, Alexander had established a complex network of LLCs and holding companies, ostensibly for various development projects. But the money flows between these entities didn't align with normal business operations. Here, Finch said on the third day of their investigation, pointing to a series of transactions. Wright and Henderson transferred $1.2 million to Harbor Circle LLC 6 months ago. Harbor Circle then transferred nearly identical amounts, minus small percentages, to Oceanic Ventures Ltd., a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. And from there, that's where it gets interesting. Oceanic made consulting payments to a domestic company called VC Strategic Partners. VC, Amber repeated. Vanessa Cole. Almost certainly. And those payments coincide exactly with the hotel meetings Mr. Reed documented. So he's not just sleeping with her. He's paying her. Finch adjusted his glasses. It's more complicated than that. This looks like a classic money laundering structure. Funds move offshore, get cleaned through a series of transactions, then return as supposedly legitimate consulting income. But why? Alexander's wealthy already. The question isn't about current wealth, Mrs. Wright. It's about tax liability and asset concealment. Finch tapped the documentation. Your husband appears to be preparing for something, reducing his visible asset profile while establishing streams of clean, untraceable funds. The implication was clear. Alexander had been planning his exit strategy long before Amber discovered the affair. How much has he moved? She asked quietly. Based on what I've found so far, approximately $4.3 million in the past year alone. The figure stunned Amber. She knew they were comfortable, but $4, $3 million in liquid assets that could be moved at will, suggested their net worth was far greater than she'd realized. "He's been planning to leave me," she said, the reality crystallizing. "This whole time." Finch's expression remained neutral. "In my experience, people don't go to these lengths unless they're anticipating a significant change in their financial circumstances." That night, after Finch departed with copies of all relevant documents, Amber sat alone in the guest bedroom, processing everything she'd learned. The betrayal had deepened from an affair to something far more calculated, a systematic plan to extract himself from their marriage while preserving his wealth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Late meeting with zoning board. Don't wait up." Another lie to add to the growing collection. She texted Catherine. "Financial investigation uncovering significant hidden assets. Offshore accounts, shell companies. Over $4 million moved in past year." Catherine's response was immediate. "Excellent. This changes the negotiating landscape entirely. Meeting tomorrow 2 p.m. my office." When Alexander returned home shortly after midnight, Amber feigned sleep, listening as he moved through the house with the careful quiet of a man accustomed to deception. Tomorrow she would continue the charade of the recovering, oblivious wife. But soon, very soon, the masks would come off. "Fraudulent conveyance," Catherine explained the next day, pacing behind her desk as she outlined their strategy. "That's the legal term for what Alexander is doing by moving these assets. When a spouse transfers property to avoid it being part of the marital estate during divorce, the court can invalidate those transfers and penalize the deceptive spouse." "So we can get it all back?" Amber asked. "Better than that." Catherine's smile was predatory. "In cases of proven financial deception, judges often award the wrong spouse a greater percentage of the marital assets as punishment." She outlined their approach. "Continue gathering evidence discreetly. Document every aspect of Alexander's absence and neglect during Amber's medical crisis, and prepare for a filing that would maximize strategic advantage." "The timing of when we serve him is crucial," Catherine emphasized. "We want him caught off guard, preferably in a situation where his immediate reaction will be witnessed by others." "I have an idea about that," Amber said, thinking about the upcoming charity gala Alexander's company sponsored annually. The Baltimore Development Trust Gala is in 3 weeks. Every major developer and investor in the city will be there. "Perfect. A public setting with witnesses who matter to him professionally," Catherine made a note. "In the meantime, we need to secure your position. I'm filing emergency motions tomorrow to freeze certain assets based on the evidence of fraudulent transfers. Won't Alexander be notified of that?" "Not immediately. The initial freeze happens without notice to prevent further dissipation of assets. He'll discover it only when he attempts to move more money, at which point ideally we'll be ready to serve him with the full divorce complaint." As Amber left Catherine's office, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Reed. "New development. Meeting today, 4 p.m. She redirected her driver to Reed's nondescript office in Fells Point, finding the investigator waiting with an expression that suggested significant news. "Mrs. Wright," he greeted her, gesturing to a chair. "Something's happened that you should be aware of." He opened a laptop and played a video. Security footage from what appeared to be a restaurant bar. The image quality was good enough to clearly show Alexander and Vanessa in what looked like an intense discussion. Though there was no audio, their body language suggested an argument. At one point, Vanessa jabbed a finger toward Alexander's chest, her expression furious. He grabbed her wrist, leaning in to say something that made her pull back, eyes widening. "This was captured last night at the Capitol Grill," Reed explained. "My source at the restaurant says they came in together, but left separately after this exchange." "They're fighting," Amber observed, studying the footage. "But about what?" "I can't be certain, but based on the timing." Reed consulted his notes. "This occurred approximately 2 hours after your forensic accountant discovered the offshore transfers. You think Alexander knows we're investigating him?" "Not specifically, but something has him spooked." Reed closed the laptop. "There's more. After leaving the restaurant, Alexander went directly to Wright and Henderson's offices, where he remained until nearly 3 a.m. Working late isn't unusual for him." "True, but this is." At 2:17 a.m., a deletion service arrived at the office, a company that specializes in document destruction. Amber felt a chill. "He's destroying evidence." "It appears so. 4 large bins were removed from the premises. This changed the timeline significantly. If Alexander was already destroying documents, their window for gathering evidence was closing fast. "I need to tell Catherine," Amber said, reaching for her phone. "There's one more thing." Reed hesitated. "While monitoring Ms. Cole, we've observed meetings with another party. Travis Henderson, your husband's business partner." "Travis? Are they—" "Not romantically, no. These appear to be clandestine business meetings held away from the office. Most recently at a coffee shop in Mount Vernon, well away from their usual professional circles. This was unexpected. Travis, who had been calling regularly to check on Amber's recovery, meeting secretly with Vanessa. It suggested complications in the company dynamics that Amber hadn't considered. "I need you to find out what they're discussing," she told Reed. "Travis has always been loyal to Alexander. If he's meeting with Vanessa behind Alexander's back, something significant is happening." Over the next week, Amber maintained her role as the recovering, unaware wife, despite the increasing difficulty of hiding her knowledge. Alexander's behavior grew more erratic. Late nights at the office, hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered a room, irritability over minor household matters. One evening, as they shared a rare dinner together, Alexander casually mentioned the charity gala. "The Development Trust Gala is coming up. Do you think you'll be well enough to attend?" "I wouldn't miss it," Amber replied, her voice carefully neutral. "My doctor says I'm recovering ahead of schedule." Alexander studied her over his wine glass. "You seem different lately. Brain surgery will do that to you." Amber managed a small smile. "Changes perspective." "I suppose it would." He set down his glass. "I should warn you. Vanessa Cole will be there. The new marketing director I mentioned. The board insisted she attend to network with potential clients." The casual way he referenced his mistress, as if Amber had no reason to recognize the name, confirmed the depth of his deception. "I look forward to meeting her," Amber said, the lie coming easily now. "You've spoken highly of her work." Alexander seemed relieved by her response, clearly interpreting it as continued ignorance. "It's an important night for the company. The Harborview project is finally moving forward, and several key investors will be there. I'll make sure to be appropriately supportive," Amber promised, thinking of the very different role she would play that evening. Later that night, Amber received an unexpected text from Travis. "Need to speak with you, important. Can we meet tomorrow?" Alone. After consulting with Catherine, who advised caution but saw potential advantage in learning what Travis wanted, Amber arranged to meet him at a quiet cafe in Roland Park, far from Alexander's usual haunts. Travis arrived looking haggard, the confident business executive replaced by a man clearly under significant stress. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, glancing nervously around the nearly empty cafe. "How's your recovery going?" "Better every day," Amber replied. "What's so urgent, Travis?" He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "I don't know how to say this, so I'll just be direct. I think Alexander is engaged in some questionable financial practices, and I'm worried you might not be aware of what's happening." Amber kept her expression carefully neutral. "What kind of practices?" "Fund transfers that don't align with our projects, documentation that doesn't match our actual holdings, and—" he hesitated. "Large payments to Vanessa Cole that exceed any reasonable compensation for her position." "I see." Amber watched Travis carefully. "And why are you telling me this now?" "Because I think Alexander is planning something that will hurt a lot of people, including you." Travis leaned forward, lowering his voice. 3 days ago, he asked me to sign off on transferring our major assets to new holding companies where he's the sole signatory. When I questioned it, he claimed it was for tax purposes, but the timing... Amber, I've seen the way he treats you since your surgery, the way he talks about you when you're not around. It's not how someone talks about a spouse they respect. The confirmation of Alexander's disdain stung, even though she'd already known the truth. "Are you saying you think he's planning to leave me?" "I think he's planning to leave everyone holding the bag." Travis's expression was grim. "The company has significant debt hidden in subsidiary entities, debt that doesn't appear on our public financial statements. If these new transfers go through, Alexander walks away with the assets, while the liabilities remain with Wright and Henderson, and with its shareholders, including me." "And Vanessa's role in this?" "She's been documenting everything. Initially, I think she was a willing participant, but recently..." He shook his head. "I think she realized Alexander planned to betray her too." This explained the argument Reed had captured on video. Not lovers' quarrel, but a business dispute between co-conspirators. "Why come to me?" Amber asked. "Why not go to the authorities?" "Because I'm implicated too, even if unwittingly, and because Travis met her eyes directly. You deserve to know what he's doing. After everything, you at least deserve that." After Travis left, Amber immediately called Catherine to relay the conversation. The attorney listened without interruption, then said, "This changes our approach. If Wright and Henderson is carrying hidden debt, that affects the valuation of marital assets, and Travis Henderson could be a crucial witness for our case. He's scared," Amber noted, "worried about his own liability, as he should be, but that makes him valuable to us. We should offer him a deal, his testimony in exchange for helping him navigate his own legal exposure." The pieces were falling into place faster than Amber had anticipated. With Travis potentially turning against him, and Vanessa apparently wavering in her loyalty, Alexander's carefully constructed scheme was beginning to fracture from within. 2 days before the gala, Amber finally came face to face with Vanessa Cole. It happened by design rather than accident. Following Reed's surveillance updates, Amber timed her lunch at Petit Louis in Roland Park to coincide with Vanessa's regular Wednesday reservation. Dressed impeccably, showing no outward signs of her recent surgery, Amber arranged to be seated at the neighboring table. Vanessa was younger than Amber had expected, early 30s with a sleek blonde bob and the poised confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. She was dining alone, focused on her phone, when Amber deliberately dropped her purse beside Vanessa's table. "I'm so sorry," Amber said, retrieving it. Vanessa glanced up, the practiced smile of social politeness freezing as recognition dawned in her eyes. You're Amber Wright." "I am." Amber straightened, extending her hand. "And you must be Vanessa Cole. I believe you work with my husband." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Yes. I'm the marketing director at Wright and Henderson. May I join you just for a moment?" Without waiting for a response, Amber slid into the chair opposite Vanessa, signaling the waiter for a glass of water. "Mrs. Wright, I don't think—" "Amber, please. After all, we have so much in common." Her smile was glacial. "For instance, we both know what the inside of room 718 at the Sagamore Pendry looks like." Vanessa's shock was visible, her composure cracking. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else." Amber placed her phone on the table, screen up, displaying one of Reed's photographs, Alexander and Vanessa entering the hotel room. "I know everything, Vanessa. The affair, the money laundering through Oceanic Ventures, the payments to VC strategic partners, all of it." Vanessa's hand trembled as she set down her fork. "What do you want?" "Information. What exactly is Alexander planning and when?" Vanessa glanced around nervously. "I can't talk about this here." "You can and you will." Amber's voice remained conversational, her expression pleasant for any observers. "Because right now, you're facing potential charges for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, unless of course you cooperate." The younger woman seemed to calculate her options, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. "Alexander is transferring the remaining liquid assets tomorrow," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything, to accounts only he can access." "And the company?" "Left with the debt and ongoing projects that are underwater. Travis has been trying to block it, but Alexander has majority control." "And your role in all this?" Vanessa's laugh was bitter. "I was supposed to go with him. We had it all planned. Leave the country after the gala, settle somewhere without extradition. But last week I discovered he's been setting up separate accounts without my name on them. He's planning to cut me out too. Hence the argument at Capitol Grill." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You've been watching us." "Of course I have. Did you think I wouldn't fight back?" Amber leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen, Vanessa. You're going to provide a sworn statement to my attorney detailing everything. The affair, the financial fraud, Alexander's plans to leave the country. In exchange, we'll ensure the prosecutor understands your cooperation when charges are filed. You're going to report him." "Oh, I'm going to destroy him." Amber's smile never wavered. "But you have a choice about whether you go down with him or not." After a moment's hesitation, Vanessa nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" The morning of the Baltimore Development Trust Gala, Amber met with Catherine Zhang for final preparations. The attorney had filed emergency motions the previous day, successfully freezing the accounts Alexander had planned to use for his final transfers. "He'll discover the freeze today when the transactions fail," Catherine explained, "which means we need to move quickly." The process server will be at the gala tonight, ready to deliver the divorce complaint at my signal. And the criminal allegations? I've scheduled a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office for Monday morning. The evidence we've compiled, especially with Vanessa Cole's cooperation, is compelling enough for them to open a formal investigation. Amber nodded, a strange calm settling over her. After weeks of methodical planning, countless hours of evidence gathering, and the emotional toll of confronting her husband's betrayal while still recovering from brain surgery, the endgame was finally at hand. "Are you ready for this?" Catherine asked, studying her client carefully. "Once we serve him publicly, there's no going back. Alexander will fight dirty." "He already has," Amber replied. "He just didn't expect me to fight back." That evening, as her driver navigated toward the Four Seasons where the gala was being held, Amber's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Where are you? Guests are arriving." For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a genuine smile. Alexander, who had abandoned her during brain surgery, who had systematically betrayed her with another woman, who had planned to leave her destitute while he escaped with millions, was now impatiently awaiting her arrival at an event celebrating Baltimore's development community, a community he had been quietly defrauding. The irony was exquisite. "On my way," she texted back, just running a few minutes late. In truth, her timing was precisely calculated. Catherine had arranged for Amber to arrive after most guests were present, ensuring maximum witnesses for what would follow. The ballroom was filled with Baltimore's business elite when Amber finally made her entrance. Heads turned as she moved through the crowd in a striking emerald gown, chosen specifically because Alexander had once mentioned he disliked the color. Her surgical scar was cleverly concealed by a new hairstyle, and weeks of focused recovery had restored her strength for this moment. Alexander spotted her from across the room, where he stood with a group of investors. His expression shifted from irritation to something approaching alarm as he took in her confident posture, the determined set of her jaw. Perhaps some instinct warned him that something had changed. He excused himself from the group and made his way toward her. "You're late," he said by way of greeting. "The Harborview investors were asking about you." "Were they?" Amber accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "How flattering. And is Vanessa here too? I've been so looking forward to meeting her." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Alexander's face. "She's around somewhere, networking with potential clients." "Networking? Is that what you call it?" Amber took a sip of champagne, studying her husband over the rim of the glass. "Tell me, Alex, did you network with her in New York while I was in surgery, or was that purely pleasure?" The color drained from Alexander's face. "What are you talking about?" "Room 718 at the Pendry, the Four Seasons charge on our joint card. The trips to New York when you registered as Mr. and Mrs. Wright." Amber's voice remained conversational, though several nearby guests had begun to notice the tension between them. "Or perhaps we should discuss oceanic ventures and the millions you've been moving offshore." Alexander grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her skin as he tried to steer her toward a less populated area of the ballroom. "You've lost your mind. That tumor must have—" "Take your hand off me." Amber's voice cut like steel. "Now." Something in her tone, a newfound authority he'd never heard before, made Alexander release her instinctively. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he hissed, glancing nervously at the curious onlookers nearby. "These accusations are insane." "Are they? Then you won't mind explaining them to a judge." Amber nodded slightly toward the entrance, where a man in a suit had just entered, the process server Catherine had arranged. "Because that's exactly what you're about to do." Alexander followed her gaze, his expression shifting from anger to confusion as the man approached them directly. "What is this? Who is that?" "Mr. Alexander Wright," the server asked formally. "Yes, what?" "You've been served." The man handed Alexander a thick envelope. "These documents require your immediate attention." Alexander stared at the envelope, then at Amber, comprehension dawning in his eyes as whispers spread through the nearby crowd. "You're filing for divorce? Here? Now?" "Actually," Amber said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those closest to them, "I filed 3 days ago, on grounds of adultery, abandonment, and financial malfeasance. You're being served here because it seemed fitting, surrounded by the community you've been planning to defraud." The murmurs around them grew louder as Alexander tore open the envelope, his face paling further as he scanned the contents. "These allegations, these are lies." You have no proof. We have everything, Alex. The hotel footage, the financial transfers, Vanessa's sworn statement, Travis's testimony about the hidden debt. Amber stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for him. You left me alone during brain surgery to be with your mistress. Did you really think I wouldn't make you pay for that? Before Alexander could respond, Travis appeared at Amber's side, his expression grim but resolved. Alex, the US. Attorney's office just called the company. They're executing a search warrant at the office first thing Monday morning. Alexander's face contorted with rage as realization dawned, the full extent of Amber's counterattack becoming clear. You bitch, you've ruined everything. No, Alex, you did that yourself. Amber turned to address the stunned crowd that had gathered around them. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. It seems my husband has urgent legal matters to attend to. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. With that, she handed her untouched champagne to a wide-eyed waiter and walked calmly toward the exit, leaving Alexander standing amid the wreckage of his carefully constructed facade, betrayed by his mistress, abandoned by his business partner, and outmaneuvered by the wife he had so gravely underestimated. Outside in the cool Baltimore night, Amber took her first deep breath in what felt like months. The game had changed. The hunted had become the hunter, and Alexander Wright was about to learn exactly what it cost to betray the woman who had loved him for 12 years. The morning after the gala, Amber awoke to her phone buzzing incessantly. Texts from friends who had witnessed the confrontation, voicemails from acquaintances feigning concern while fishing for details, and most notably, 3 missed calls from Dr. Eleanor Weiss, followed by a text. Please call my office immediately. Concerns about your recent scans. Before she could process that worrying message, Catherine Zhang called. Alexander's attorney just filed an emergency motion, Catherine said without preamble. They're requesting a psychiatric evaluation, claiming your behavior at the gala demonstrates mental instability resulting from your brain surgery. Amber sat up slowly, mindful of the headache that had returned overnight. He's claiming I'm crazy? Essentially. The motion suggests you're experiencing post-operative paranoia and delusions, and that your accusations stem from neurological complications rather than fact. Catherine's voice hardened. It's a desperate move, but we need to address it immediately. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. He's not wasting any time. Neither are we. I've already contacted Dr. Weiss to provide testimony about your cognitive status. With her support, we can refute these claims quickly. The mention of Dr. Weiss reminded Amber of the neurologist's urgent messages. Catherine, I need to call you back. My doctor's been trying to reach me. After ending the call, Amber dialed Dr. Weiss's office, her stomach tightening with apprehension. Mrs. Wright, Dr. Weiss said when she came on the line. Thank you for returning my call. I've been reviewing your most recent MRI, and I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. The tumor's back? Amber asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, not the tumor, but there's evidence of increased intracranial pressure again, possibly a complication from surgery. I'd like you to come in today for additional tests. Amber closed her eyes, absorbing this new challenge. Just when she had finally taken control, her body was betraying her again. I understand your attorney has contacted me about testifying, Dr. Weiss continued. Under the circumstances, I think it's especially important we address these new symptoms promptly. I'll be there in an hour, Amber promised. As she dressed, moving more slowly than usual as the headache intensified, Amber's phone began buzzing with news alerts. Alexander hadn't waited for the courts. He'd taken his counter-narrative public. Baltimore Business Journal. Wright & Henderson CEO denies fraud allegations, claims wife's illness. Behind delusional accusations, Baltimore Sun, high-profile divorce rocks. Development community. Alexander Wright says, wife's brain tumor causing paranoia. By the time her driver arrived to take her to Johns Hopkins, local business websites were running with the story, most framing it as Alexander portrayed. A tragic case of medical complications causing a respected art curator to make unfounded accusations against her successful husband. The Baltimore Development Trust had already issued a statement distancing itself from the unfortunate personal situation while expressing confidence in Alexander Wright's integrity and continued leadership. In the span of 12 hours, Alexander had reframed the narrative entirely, transforming himself from adulterer and fraudster into the sympathetic husband of a mentally unstable woman. "He's good," Amber murmured to herself as the car navigated morning traffic. "I'll give him that." At Johns Hopkins, Dr. Weiss conducted a thorough examination, her concern growing more evident as she noted Amber's symptoms: headaches, intermittent blurred vision, and elevated blood pressure. "The MRI shows a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid," Dr. Weiss explained, displaying the scan on her computer. "It's creating pressure that could explain your recurring headaches." "What does that mean for the hearing tomorrow?" "Alexander's attorney is claiming I'm mentally incompetent." Dr. Weiss's expression hardened. "I'm aware of the allegations. They're medically unfounded. While you do have a physical complication that requires treatment, your cognitive function remains completely intact. I'll testify to that effect if needed." "Thank you." Amber hesitated. "So what's the treatment?" "We need to place a temporary shunt to drain the excess fluid and relieve the pressure. It's a relatively minor procedure compared to your tumor removal, but it does require hospitalization for at least 48 hours. "I can't be hospitalized right now," Amber protested. "The emergency hearing is tomorrow and I need to be there." "Mrs. Wright." "Amber, this isn't optional. Without intervention, the pressure will continue to increase, potentially causing serious neurological damage." Dr. Weiss's tone softened. "I understand your legal situation is critical, but your health has to take precedence." Amber bit her lip, weighing her options. "Can the procedure wait until after the hearing tomorrow? Just 24 hours? Dr. Weiss considered this. "I don't recommend it, but if you absolutely insist, we could schedule it for tomorrow afternoon. However, you'd need to limit physical activity today, take the medications I'm prescribing, and come back immediately if your symptoms worsen." "I can do that. I'll make the arrangements," Dr. Weiss conceded reluctantly, "and I'll prepare my testimony for your hearing. For what it's worth, I find it reprehensible that your husband would use your medical condition against you this way." As Amber left the hospital with prescriptions and strict instructions to rest, she called Catherine to update her on the situation. "This complicates matters," Catherine admitted. "Alexander's team will seize on any medical issue as evidence supporting their claims. But Dr. Weiss will testify that my cognitive function isn't impaired." "Yes, and that will help. But the optics aren't ideal. A woman requiring additional brain surgery, arguing that she's perfectly capable of making rational decisions about complex financial matters. So what do? We adjust our strategy. Instead of just refuting Alexander's claims about your mental state, we present the evidence more prominently. The financial records, the witness testimonies, the documented affair, these facts stand independent of your personal condition." Catherine paused. "There's something else you should know. The Baltimore Business Journal is running a feature tomorrow on the Wright divorce. Their words, not mine. They've been contacting mutual acquaintances for quotes. Let me guess, all supportive of Alexander?" "Most of them, yes. Your social circle seems to be breaking along predictable lines. His business associates are publicly backing him, while most mutual friends are diplomatically silent." "And my friends?" "Melissa Santos gave a rather colorful quote defending you, something about Alexander deserving anatomically improbable consequences for abandoning you during brain surgery." Despite everything, Amber smiled. "That sounds like Mel. The point is, this is becoming a public spectacle. Alexander is leveraging his business connections and media relationships to control the narrative. We need to consider how to counter that without seeming retaliatory." Amber thought for a moment. "The Baltimore Museum of Art. I've worked there for 8 years, built relationships throughout the arts community. They know me. No, I'm not some unstable, vindictive wife." "Good. Reach out to trusted colleagues who might speak on your behalf, not about the divorce specifics, but about your professional reputation and character." "I will. And Catherine, we need to move forward with the financial evidence, regardless of what happens at tomorrow's hearing. Alexander's trying to discredit me personally, because he knows the numbers don't lie." By that evening, Amber had reached out to key allies in the Baltimore arts community, finding unexpected support from colleagues who had always respected her work. Daniel, her assistant curator, had already issued a statement to the press defending her professional judgment and integrity. The museum director, while unable to comment specifically on the divorce, had emphasized Amber's meticulous attention to detail and unwavering commitment to factual accuracy in her curatorial work. These professional endorsements might not directly counter Alexander's claims about her mental state, but they established a counter-narrative, one of a competent, respected professional whose judgment was trusted by cultural institutions throughout the city. As she reviewed preparation materials for the hearing with Catherine's team, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hello? Amber, it's Sandra Wright, Alexander's mother." Amber froze. In 12 years of marriage, her relationship with Alexander's parents had been cordial but distant. They lived in Boston, rarely visited Baltimore, and had always seemed to regard Amber as an acceptable but not particularly important addition to the family. "Sandra, this is unexpected." "I imagine so." The older woman's voice was crisp, New England reserve evident in every syllable. "I've been following the situation with Alexander. These allegations you're making—" "They're not allegations," Amber interrupted. "They're documented facts." A pause. "May I finish, please? What I was going to say is that these allegations don't surprise me in the least." Amber blinked in surprise. "They don't. Alexander has always taken the easiest path to what he wants, even as a child." Sandra's voice carried decades of resigned disappointment. "When I saw the news about your surgery and that my son was nowhere to be found, I suspected something like this might be happening." "You knew about my surgery? Alexander told you?" "Certainly not. Travis Henderson called us. He seemed to think we should know our daughter-in-law was undergoing brain surgery, even if our son didn't see fit to mention it." This revelation about Travis, that he had reached out to Alexander's parents while Alexander himself remained silent, added another layer to the business partner's complicated role in the situation. "I see," Amber said, unsure how to respond. "Jonathan and I are flying to Baltimore tomorrow," Sandra continued, referring to Alexander's father. "We'd like to see you if that's possible. I have a court hearing in the morning and another medical procedure scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." Amber hesitated. "But perhaps in the evening?" "That would be fine. And Amber, I want you to know that while we may not have been as close as we should have been over the years, Jonathan and I do not condone Alexander's behavior, not toward you, and certainly not in his business dealings." After ending the call, Amber sat in stunned silence. Of all the potential allies she had considered, her in-laws had never made the list. Her contemplation was interrupted by another call, this time from Travis. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without greeting. "About Alexander claiming I'm mentally incompetent?" "Yes." "No, the business news. The Harborview investors have called an emergency meeting for Friday. They're considering pulling out entirely based on the fraud allegations." "Is that bad for you?" Amber asked. "For the company, certainly. For me personally," Travis sighed heavily. "I've been documenting Alexander's questionable decisions for months, ever since I first suspected what he was doing. That documentation is now with the U.S. Attorney's Office. You went to the federal prosecutors?" "Yesterday, after the gala. I had to protect myself, Amber, and—" He hesitated. "It was the right thing to do. Alexander has been manipulating everyone. Investors, the board, you, even Vanessa." "Even you," Amber pointed out. "Yes, though I should have seen it sooner." Travis's voice grew quieter. "I've known Alexander since business school. I thought I knew who he was. I was wrong." After they ended the call, Amber found herself reflecting on Travis's words. How many people had Alexander deceived over the years? How many had believed they knew who he really was, only to discover they had been manipulated all along? She had been first among them, the wife who had loved him, supported him, believed in him, only to be discarded when he no longer found her useful. The courtroom the next morning was smaller than Amber had expected, the proceeding less formal than she had imagined. Judge Patricia Morales, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, presided over the emergency hearing with brisk efficiency. Alexander sat across the courtroom with his attorney, Raymond Donovan, a divorce lawyer known for aggressive tactics and high-profile clients. Alexander had dressed the part of the concerned husband perfectly, his expression a careful blend of worry and restraint, as he occasionally glanced in Amber's direction. "We're here on respondent's emergency motion for a psychiatric evaluation of the petitioner," Judge Morales stated, reviewing the documents before her. "Mr. Donovan, you may proceed." Donovan rose, buttoned down and polished. "Your Honor, this is a deeply unfortunate situation. Mrs. Wright underwent major brain surgery less than a month ago to remove a tumor from her frontal lobe, the area of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, impulse control, and personality." He gestured toward Amber with exaggerated sympathy. Since that procedure, she has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior, culminating in her public accusations against my client at the Baltimore Development Trust Gala. These accusations of adultery, financial fraud, and criminal conspiracy are not only false but demonstrate a concerning pattern of paranoia and confusion. Judge Morales interrupted. Are you suggesting, Mr. Donovan, that Mrs. Wright's medical team would have released her if she were experiencing such significant cognitive impairment? With respect, Your Honor, the neurosurgical team evaluated her physical recovery, not her psychological state. We're simply requesting a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation to ensure Mrs. Wright is capable of participating meaningfully in these proceedings. Catherine Zhang rose. Your Honor, this motion is nothing more than a transparent attempt to discredit my client and distract from the substantial evidence of Mr. Wright's misconduct. We have Dr. Eleanor Weiss, Mrs. Wright's neurologist, prepared to testify regarding her cognitive function. Judge Morales nodded. Call your witness, Ms. Zhang, Domketer. Weiss took the stand, her testimony clear and authoritative, as she explained Amber's medical condition, the successful removal of the tumor, and the current complications with cerebrospinal fluid pressure. And in your professional opinion, Catherine asked, has Mrs. Wright demonstrated any cognitive impairment that would affect her ability to make rational decisions or understand complex matters? None whatsoever, Dr. Weiss stated firmly. While Mrs. Wright is experiencing physical symptoms that require additional treatment, scheduled for this afternoon in fact, her cognitive function remains completely intact. The frontal lobe tumor was removed entirely, with minimal impact on surrounding tissue. There is no medical basis for questioning her mental competence. When Donovan cross-examined Dr. Weiss, his questions focused on potential complications and worst-case scenarios, attempting to create doubt about Amber's condition. Dr. Weiss remained unflappable, repeatedly returning to the actual medical evidence rather than hypotheticals. As the questioning continued, Amber noticed Alexander growing increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to Donovan during breaks in testimony. The confident facade was beginning to crack. Your Honor, Catherine said when she called her next witness, we'd like to address the substance of Mrs. Wright's accusations, which Mr. Donovan has characterized as paranoid delusions. I called Travis Henderson. Alexander visibly stiffened as his business partner took the stand. Travis avoided looking in Alexander's direction as he was sworn in, his discomfort evident, but his resolve clear. Mr. Henderson, Catherine began, what is your relationship to the parties in this case? I'm Alexander Wright's business partner at Wright & Henderson Development. We co-founded the company 7 years ago. I've known both Alexander and Amber throughout their marriage. And are you aware of the allegations Mrs. Wright has made regarding Mr. Wright's marital fidelity and business practices? Yes. In your view, as someone intimately familiar with both the marriage and the business, are these allegations consistent with reality or suggestive of delusion? Travis took a deep breath. They're entirely consistent with reality. Alexander has been engaged in an affair with our marketing director, Vanessa Cole, for at least 8 months. I've personally observed their inappropriate relationship at company functions, and I've seen documentation of their time together at various hotels. Objection, Donovan was on his feet. This is hearsay and speculation. Your Honor, Catherine countered, Mr. Henderson is testifying to direct observations relevant to the question of whether Mrs. Wright's allegations are delusional. Overruled, Judge Morales said. The witness may continue. Travis went on to describe Alexander's increasingly questionable business decisions, the movement of funds through offshore entities, and his absence during Amber's medical crisis. Mrs. Wright called me from the hospital, trying to reach her husband, Travis testified. I knew Alexander wasn't in New York on urgent business, as he claimed. He was at the Greenwich Hotel with Vanessa Cole. By the time Travis finished his testimony, Alexander's composed expression had been replaced by barely controlled fury. The narrative he had crafted of his mentally unstable wife was crumbling under the weight of corroborating evidence. Judge Morales didn't require much deliberation. The motion for psychiatric evaluation is denied, she stated firmly. Based on the medical testimony and corroborating evidence, I find no basis for questioning Mrs. Wright's competence. Furthermore, she added, looking directly at Alexander, I am ordering a full financial accounting of all marital assets, including those held in offshore accounts and subsidiary companies. All assets are to remain frozen pending further hearings. It was a significant victory, but as Amber left the courtroom, the headache that had been building throughout the morning suddenly intensified, causing her to stumble slightly. Catherine caught her arm, steadying her. "We need to get you to the hospital," she said quietly. "You've done enough for today." The procedure to place the temporary shunt was scheduled for late afternoon. As Amber was being prepared for surgery, Melissa arrived, having rearranged her shift to be present. Courtroom showdown in the morning. Brain surgery in the afternoon, Melissa said, taking Amber's hand. "You don't do anything halfway, do you?" "Apparently not." Amber managed a weak smile. "Catherine's filing the financial evidence with the court tomorrow. Once that's public record, Alexander won't be able to use the 'my wife is crazy' defense anymore. Good, because the only crazy person in your marriage is the one who thought he could get away with all this." Melissa squeezed her hand. "I'll be here when you wake up, and unlike some people, I actually mean it." The procedure was less complex than the tumor removal, but still required general anesthesia. As Amber drifted into unconsciousness, her last thought was of the morning's victory. Small but significant, a step toward justice. When she awoke in the recovery room, the relief was immediate. The crushing pressure in her head had subsided, replaced by the more manageable pain of the surgical site itself. "Better?" Dr. Weiss asked, checking Amber's pupillary response with a small light. "Much," Amber confirmed. "Thank you for your testimony today. I simply stated the medical facts." Dr. Weiss made a note in Amber's chart. "Though I must admit it was satisfying to counter that attorney's implications. Using a patient's medical condition to discredit them is particularly offensive to me as a physician." Melissa entered with a tablet in hand. "You're trending on Twitter," she announced. "Well, not you specifically, but the right divorce is gaining traction. The business community is split between Team Alexander and Team Amber." "Wonderful," Amber said dryly. "Just what I needed. My personal trauma as public entertainment. It's not all bad. The Baltimore Sun ran a piece about the troubling pattern of discrediting women using mental health stigma. They cited Alexander's court filing as a prime example. As promised, Sandra and Jonathan Wright arrived that evening. Alexander's father, tall, distinguished, with the same intense blue eyes as his son, stood awkwardly at the foot of Amber's hospital bed while Sandra sat beside her. "This isn't how we envisioned seeing you again," Sandra said, her expression softening as she took in Amber's condition. "2 brain surgeries in a month, and our son nowhere to be found. He was in court this morning," Amber pointed out, "trying to have me declared mentally incompetent." Jonathan Wright spoke for the first time, his Boston accent more pronounced than his wife's. "We raised him better than this. I don't know where we went wrong." "You didn't," Amber said, surprising herself with the defense of her in-laws. "Alexander makes his own choices." "Perhaps, but we certainly never challenged him enough on those choices." Sandra's gaze was direct. "We've spoken with your attorney, Ms. Zhang. We've offered to provide testimony regarding certain financial matters we became aware of last year." Amber's eyebrows rose. "What financial matters?" "Alexander approached us for a loan, a substantial one, claiming it was for a development project the banks wouldn't finance due to regulatory hurdles," Jonathan explained. "We later discovered he had used the money to establish the initial offshore accounts your investigator uncovered." "You knew about the offshore accounts?" Amber was stunned. "Not initially, but Jonathan has connections in financial services," Sandra explained. "When Alexander's story about the development project didn't check out, we made inquiries. What we found concerned us enough that we hired our own investigator." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Family loyalty," Jonathan admitted, looking ashamed. "A misplaced sense that we should handle it privately. We confronted Alexander and he promised to rectify the situation. Obviously he didn't." This new information, that Alexander's parents had known about his financial improprieties before Amber discovered the affair, added yet another layer to the deception. Alexander had been juggling lies on multiple fronts, manipulating everyone in his life. "We should have told you," Sandra said quietly. "Perhaps if we had, you might have been spared some of this pain." After they left, promising to meet with Catherine the next day, Amber lay in the darkened hospital room reflecting on the day's revelations. The Wright family dynamics were more complicated than she had realized. Alexander's manipulative behavior apparently long established, his parents' complicity through silence, enabling his worst tendencies. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important." Alexander Amber showed the message to Melissa, who had remained at the hospital despite Amber's insistence that she go home and rest. Absolutely not, Melissa said immediately. He's desperate and looking for a way to manipulate you again. I know, but I'm curious what he thinks he can possibly say at this point. Before she could decide whether to respond, Catherine called with an update. The financial evidence has been formally filed with the court, she reported, and the U.S. Attorney's office has confirmed they're proceeding with their investigation. They've scheduled interviews with Travis and Vanessa Cole for tomorrow. What about Alexander's parents? Will their testimony help? Significantly. It establishes a pattern of financial deception predating your discovery of the affair. This undermines any claim that you're manufacturing accusations out of spite. After the call ended, Amber's phone buzzed again. Please, Amber, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I'm outside your hospital room. He's here? Melissa stood up, moving toward the door. I'm getting security. Wait. Amber reached for her friend's arm. Let me hear what he has to say. Amber, no. He's trying to manipulate you again. I know exactly what he's doing, but I want to hear it. Amber's expression hardened. I want to see him try to charm his way out of this. I want to remember that face when everything falls apart for him. Reluctantly, Melissa agreed, but insisted on staying in the room. She opened the door, fixing Alexander with a glare that would have withered most men. 5 minutes, that's it. Alexander entered, looking far less polished than he had in court that morning. His suit was rumpled, his normally perfect hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. For a moment he seemed taken aback by Amber's appearance, the newly shaved section of her head where the shunt had been placed, the evident fatigue in her face. Amber, he began, his voice softer than she had heard it in months. I didn't know you were having another procedure today. There's a lot you don't know about me anymore, she replied evenly. What do you want, Alexander? He glanced at Melissa, clearly hoping for privacy. When it became evident that she wasn't leaving, he sighed and approached the bed. This has gotten out of hand, he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of conciliation. The lawyers, the court filings, the media attention. None of this is good for either of us. It's certainly not good for you, Amber agreed. Fraud investigations rarely are. Alexander winced. That's what I'm trying to address. The financial allegations, they're being misconstrued. Yes, I moved some assets offshore, but it was for tax planning, not fraud. If we could just talk privately, I could explain everything. The way you explained being in New York during my brain surgery, or the way you explained the charges at the Pendry, or perhaps the way you explained Vanessa Cole to me as just your marketing director. His expression tightened momentarily before he regained control. I've made mistakes, Amber. Serious ones. The affair with Vanessa, it was a terrible lapse in judgment. I got caught up in something that meant nothing. Nothing. Amber's voice was cold. Is that what you told her too? Vanessa is complicated. She manipulated the situation, made me believe. He stopped, recognizing the futility of that approach from Amber's expression. Look, what matters is us. 12 years of marriage. That has to count for something. It counted for nothing when I was lying in a hospital bed waiting for you to show up. It counted for nothing when you were checking into hotels with another woman. It counted for nothing when you were moving our assets offshore to keep them from me. Alexander took a step closer, his voice dropping to that intimate tone he had once used to convince investors to trust him with millions. Amber, please, we can start over. I'll make this right. Whatever you want. The house, more autonomy in our finances, anything. Just call off the lawyers. For a brief, disorienting moment, Amber could almost see the man she had fallen in love with. Charming, persuasive, seemingly sincere in his contrition. The man who had once promised to build something amazing with her in Baltimore. Then she remembered waking up from brain surgery, alone and afraid, her calls unanswered, while Alexander was with another woman. You know what I want, Alexander, she said quietly. I want back the 12 years I spent loving someone who was capable of leaving me alone during brain surgery. But since that's impossible, I'll settle for watching you lose everything you value. Your money, your reputation, your freedom. Alexander's facade cracked, the charm replaced by a flash of the rage simmering beneath. You think you've won. This is just the beginning, Amber. You have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm cornered. Actually, I do. You'll lie, manipulate, threaten, and charm in that order. You'll use my medical condition against me, turn friends against me, try to paint me as unstable or vindictive. Amber met his gaze steadily. But here's what you don't understand, Alexander. I'm not the same woman who trusted you blindly for 12 years. That woman died on the operating table. The woman who woke up is stronger than you can imagine." Melissa stepped forward. "Time's up. Get out before I call security." Alexander straightened, adjusting his tie in a futile attempt to regain composure. "This isn't over." "You're right about that," Amber agreed. "It's just beginning." After he left, Melissa turned to Amber with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Are you okay?" "No," Amber admitted, tears finally coming now that Alexander was gone. "But I will be. For the first time since I woke up from surgery and he wasn't there, I'm certain of that." The next morning brought fresh challenges. Alexander's team had filed a motion contesting the asset freeze, claiming it was preventing him from conducting legitimate business operations. Simultaneously, the Baltimore Business Journal published a feature examining the right divorce from multiple angles, including quotes from several of Amber's colleagues, defending her character and professional judgment. More troublingly, Amber's phone had been flooded with messages from mutual friends, many expressing concern about the misunderstanding and offering to mediate between her and Alexander. It became clear that he was working his social connections, trying to position himself as the reasonable party seeking reconciliation. "Classic Darvo," Catherine explained when Amber called her about the messages. "Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. He's now portraying himself as the victim of your unreasonable vindictiveness, rather than the perpetrator of abandonment and fraud. It's working with some people," Amber noted, deleting another sympathetic message suggesting she consider Alexander's olive branch. "That's to be expected. Some people will always prefer a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth." Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact. "But the financial evidence doesn't care about social niceties. The numbers tell the story regardless of who believes it." Released from the hospital that afternoon, Amber returned to the Guilford house to find it eerily quiet. Alexander had apparently been staying elsewhere since the courthouse confrontation, likely with one of the friends now texting Amber about reconciliation. For the first time since her initial surgery, Amber climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, moving slowly but determined to reclaim the space. Alexander's closet remained full of custom suits and designer shoes, his dresser still organized with military precision. The bathroom counter held his expensive grooming products, arranged just so. These physical remnants of their shared life felt like artifacts from another era, familiar yet distant, like examining items in a museum exhibit about someone else's life. On impulse, Amber began removing Alexander's possessions from the bathroom, placing them in a box. Then she moved to his closet, systematically packing his clothes. The physical action of separating his things from hers was therapeutic, a tangible representation of the emotional detachment she was working to achieve. As she cleared his nightstand, she discovered a small velvet box hidden beneath some papers. Opening it revealed a diamond tennis bracelet, clearly expensive, definitely not something he had ever given to her. The gift intended for Vanessa, perhaps. Amber set it aside for Catherine, more evidence of funds being spent outside the marriage. By evening, she had transformed the master suite, removing all traces of Alexander's presence. The space felt lighter somehow, as if his absence was a relief rather than a loss. Melissa arrived with dinner and reinforcements, Daniel from the museum and 2 other close friends who had remained steadfastly in Amber's corner despite Alexander's social campaign. "We're your protection detail for the next few days," Melissa announced. "Catherine thinks Alexander might try to access the house when you're alone, either to remove evidence or to pressure you into negotiations without lawyers present." "He wouldn't," Amber began, then stopped herself. The old Amber would have insisted Alexander would never intrude where he wasn't welcome. The new Amber knew better. "Thank you, all of you." Daniel, who had been quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, smiled sympathetically. "The museum board met today. They want you to know your position is secure, regardless of how public this becomes. In fact, they've approved your proposal for the Resilience exhibition when you're ready to return." This news that her professional world remained stable despite the chaos of her personal life brought unexpected tears to Amber's eyes. "I didn't think they'd still want me involved with everything happening." "Are you kidding? Your curatorial vision is more valuable than ever," Daniel assured her. "And between us, several board members have had their own experiences with Alexander over the years. They're not entirely shocked by recent revelations." As they ate dinner together in the kitchen where Amber had collapsed just weeks earlier, She found herself experiencing something that had been absent since her diagnosis. Genuine moments of laughter and connection. These people, her chosen family, had stood by her through the darkest period of her life without hesitation. The stark contrast between their loyalty and Alexander's betrayal crystallized something in Amber's mind. She had been measuring her worth through Alexander's eyes for too long. His abandonment had not diminished her. It had simply revealed his character, not hers. Later that night, as she settled into the reclaimed master bedroom, her phone buzzed with a text from Travis. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. Alexander trying to force a vote to maintain control of company assets despite freeze. I need anything you have on the Cayman accounts. Amber forwarded the message to Catherine, who responded immediately. I'll have everything to Travis by morning. This is getting interesting. Alexander's making exactly the desperate moves we anticipated. The chess game was accelerating, each player making bold moves as the endgame approached. Alexander, despite his public posture of seeking reconciliation, was clearly working behind the scenes to secure what mattered most to him, control of his money and his company. Amber drifted off to sleep that night with a newfound clarity. The path ahead would not be easy. Alexander would fight with everything he had, using every tool at his disposal. But for the first time since she had discovered his betrayal, Amber felt truly confident in her ability to withstand whatever came next. The woman who had trusted blindly was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more determined, and infinitely more dangerous to the man who had underestimated her so completely. 3 weeks after the emergency hearing, the Baltimore County Circuit Court was packed to capacity. What had begun as a private divorce had transformed into the city's most compelling legal drama, with journalists, business associates, and curious onlookers filling the gallery. Today's proceedings would determine not just the division of marital assets, but potentially Alexander Wright's very freedom. Amber sat beside Catherine Zhang, her posture straight, despite the lingering fatigue from her medical treatments. The shunt had been removed a week earlier, her recovery progressing well enough that Dr. Weiss had cleared her for full participation in court proceedings. Physically, she was healing. Emotionally, she had reached a state of cold resolve. Across the aisle, Alexander sat with Raymond Donovan and 2 additional attorneys, reinforcements brought in as the case expanded from divorce to potential criminal liability. Alexander maintained his composed facade, but Amber noted the subtle signs of strain, the tightness around his eyes, the slight disarray of his normally impeccable appearance, the constant conferring with his legal team. Judge Patricia Morales entered the courtroom, and the bailiff called for all to rise. Unlike the smaller chambers where the emergency hearing had taken place, today's proceedings were held in the main courtroom, a fitting stage for the final act of the Wright marriage. We have several matters before us today, Judge Morales began after everyone was seated. First, the equitable distribution of marital assets in the divorce action. Second, consideration of allegations of fraudulent conveyance. And third, addressing potential referrals to criminal authorities based on evidence presented. We'll begin with petitioner's evidence regarding marital assets. Catherine rose, her burgundy suit a power statement against the sea of dark greys and navy blues favored by most attorneys present. Your Honor, as previously filed, we have comprehensive documentation of the marital estate, including assets Mr. Wright attempted to conceal through offshore accounts and shell companies. She approached the bench with a bound presentation, simultaneously displayed on screens for all to see, a detailed financial map of Alexander's complex network of accounts, properties, and investments. The total marital estate exceeds $23 million, Catherine stated, the figure eliciting murmurs from the gallery. This includes the Guilford residence valued at $3.2 million, investment properties throughout Baltimore totaling $5.7 million, Alexander Wright's 62% ownership stake in Wright and Henderson Development, valued at approximately $8.4 million, personal investment accounts of $4.1 million, and various other assets including art, vehicles, and personal property. Amber kept her expression neutral, though internally she was stunned. $23 million, far more than she had imagined, even after Finch's investigations had revealed Alexander's hidden wealth. For 12 years, she had lived modestly despite their comfortable circumstances, never realizing the true extent of their financial situation. Additionally, Catherine continued, we've documented Mr. Wright's attempts to remove approximately $4 $3 million from marital assets through the creation of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, using shell companies to obscure the paper trail. These actions constitute fraudulent conveyance under Maryland law. Judge Morales reviewed the documentation carefully. Mr. Donovan, your response to these figures? Alexander's attorney rose, his strategy immediately apparent. Your Honor, we contest several aspects of Ms. Zhang's valuation, particularly regarding Wright and Henderson development. The company currently faces significant challenges due to the very public nature of these proceedings. The true value is likely much lower than stated. Convenient timing, Judge Morales noted dryly. Are you suggesting that Mr. Wright's company has lost value precisely when it would benefit him in divorce proceedings? The market reacts to uncertainty, Your Honor. That's simply economic reality. I see. And the offshore accounts? Donovan cleared his throat. Mr. Wright acknowledges establishing international investment vehicles, but these were legitimate tax planning strategies, not attempts to hide assets from Mrs. Wright. Tax planning that coincidentally began after Mr. Wright commenced his affair with Ms. Cole, Catherine interjected. Objection. Counsel is attempting to conflate personal indiscretions with legitimate business decisions. Overruled, Judge Morales stated firmly. The timing of financial decisions is relevant to these proceedings. She turned to Catherine. You may call your first witness. The petitioner calls Edward Finch. The forensic accountant took the stand, his precise manner and meticulous presentation lending weight to his testimony. Using charts and bank records, Finch methodically demonstrated the movement of funds from Wright and Henderson through various entities before eventually reaching accounts controlled solely by Alexander. In your professional opinion, Catherine asked, were these transactions consistent with legitimate tax planning? No, Finch stated unequivocally. The pattern of transfers, the timing relative to personal events in Mr. Wright's life, and the deliberate obscuring of ownership all point to asset concealment rather than tax optimization. Donovan's cross-examination attempted to undermine Finch's conclusions by suggesting alternative explanations for each transaction, but the accountant remained steadfast, returning repeatedly to the overall pattern rather than isolated events. As Finch stepped down, Catherine called her next witness. The petitioner calls Vanessa Cole. A visible ripple of tension passed through Alexander's body as Vanessa entered the courtroom. She wore a conservative navy dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a stark contrast to her usual polished glamour. She avoided looking at Alexander as she was sworn in, her gaze fixed either on Catherine or the documents before her. Ms. Cole, what was your relationship with Alexander Wright? Catherine began. We were involved romantically for approximately 10 months. Vanessa stated, her voice steady if somewhat subdued. The relationship began while I was employed as marketing director at Wright and Henderson Development. And during this relationship, did Mr. Wright discuss his financial affairs with you? Yes. Alexander told me he was restructuring his assets to protect them in case his marriage ended. He established offshore accounts and created shell companies to move money beyond his wife's reach. Did he specifically mention divorce planning? Yes. He said his marriage had been over for years, but he needed to protect his wealth before making it official. And what was your role in this financial restructuring? Vanessa hesitated, glancing briefly at Alexander before continuing. I established a consulting company, VC Strategic Partners, which received payments from an offshore entity called Oceanic Ventures. These payments were essentially Alexander's money being returned to the United States in a way that wouldn't be connected to him. Were you aware that this arrangement might be illegal? Not initially. Alexander presented it as sophisticated tax planning. It wasn't until later that I realized we were potentially committing fraud. Donovan's cross-examination was brutal, attempting to paint Vanessa as a scorned lover seeking revenge. Isn't it true, Ms. Cole, that you're testifying against Mr. Wright today to secure immunity for yourself in the ongoing federal investigation? I have an agreement with prosecutors, yes, Vanessa admitted, but that doesn't change the facts of what happened. And these facts conveniently shift all responsibility to Mr. Wright while portraying you as an unwitting participant. I've acknowledged my role, Vanessa replied, a flash of her former confidence emerging. I'm not claiming innocence, but Alexander designed this system, not me. He directed every transaction, every account creation. I followed his instructions. Instructions that benefited you financially, correct? to the tune of several $100,000? Yes, I was compensated for my participation. One final question, Ms. Cole. When did you decide to turn against Alexander Wright? Was it before or after you discovered he wouldn't be leaving his wife for you? Vanessa's composure faltered momentarily. It was after I discovered he was planning to leave the country without me, taking all the money we'd moved offshore. He was going to abandon me just like he abandoned his wife during her brain surgery. The mention of Amber's surgery, which had not previously been raised in the day's testimony, drew all eyes toward her momentarily. She kept her expression neutral, though Catherine's slight nod indicated this unplanned mention had worked in their favor. As the morning progressed, additional witnesses established the pattern of Alexander's deception. Travis Henderson detailing the business improprieties, Sandra and Jonathan Wright reluctantly testifying about the loan their son had diverted to offshore accounts, and finally Marcus Reed presenting the surveillance evidence of Alexander's affair. Throughout it all, Alexander maintained a facade of calm indignation, occasionally whispering to his attorneys but otherwise remaining still and controlled. Only someone who knew him as well as Amber could recognize the signs of his growing desperation, the slight tick in his jaw, the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the table edge. After the lunch recess, it was Alexander's turn to testify. He took the stand with practiced confidence, his testimony a masterclass in selective presentation and alternate explanations. Yes, I established international accounts, he acknowledged when questioned by Donovan. Many business people do. These were investment vehicles, not attempts to hide assets. And your relationship with Ms. Cole? A regrettable lapse in judgment, Alexander said, his expression appropriately contrite. A mistake I've acknowledged and deeply regret. But my personal failings have no bearing on legitimate business decisions. When Catherine rose for cross-examination, her approach was methodical rather than confrontational. Mr. Wright, you've characterized your financial maneuvers as legitimate business decisions. When exactly did you inform your wife about these offshore investments? Amber wasn't involved in day-to-day financial decisions, Alexander replied smoothly. She focused on her curatorial work while I handled our finances. That wasn't my question. Did you ever specifically inform Mrs. Wright about the offshore accounts you were establishing? Not in those specific terms, no. Catherine approached with a document. This is your joint tax return from last year. Did you include the offshore accounts on this return? Those accounts weren't required to be reported at that time. Again, not my question. Did you include them? Yes or no? No. Catherine continued this pattern, forcing Alexander to acknowledge a series of omissions and deceptions, each seemingly minor in isolation, but damning when viewed collectively. By the time she reached the central issue of his absence during Amber's surgery, Alexander's composed facade had begun to crack. You were in New York with Vanessa Cole while your wife underwent brain surgery, correct? I had meetings that couldn't be rescheduled, Alexander insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Amber was in capable medical hands. Did you attempt to reschedule these supposedly critical meetings when you learned of your wife's diagnosis? The timing was complicated. Please answer the question. Did you attempt to reschedule? No. In fact, you booked the trip to New York with Ms. Cole after learning of Mrs. Wright's surgery date, didn't you? Alexander hesitated, glancing at his attorneys. I don't recall the exact timing. Catherine produced hotel records. The reservation at the Greenwich Hotel was made the same day Mrs. Wright informed you of her surgery date. You specifically chose to be away during her procedure. For the first time, Alexander appeared genuinely flustered. That's not... I didn't... You deliberately abandoned your wife during a life-threatening medical crisis to be with your mistress, Catherine stated, not as a question but as a fact. And then you attempted to use that same medical condition to have her declared mentally incompetent when she discovered your betrayal. Objection, Donovan was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'm establishing a pattern of behavior directly relevant to the distribution of marital assets, Catherine countered. Maryland law explicitly considers factors such as how and why the marriage ended when determining equitable distribution. Overruled, Judge Morales said. The witness will answer. Alexander straightened his tie, visibly gathering himself. I made mistakes in my marriage. I've acknowledged that, but my financial decisions were separate matters made in good faith. Good faith, Catherine repeated skeptically. Mr. Wright, when did you establish the first offshore account? About 14 months ago. And when did your affair with Ms. Cole begin? Approximately 10 months ago. So you began hiding assets before the affair started, Catherine noted, suggesting you were planning to leave your marriage long before Mrs. Wright became ill or discovered your infidelity. Alexander had no effective response, and his testimony concluded with his credibility severely diminished. The final witness of the day was unexpected. Detective Michael Torres of the Baltimore Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, called by the court rather than either party. Detective Torres, Judge Morales began, you've reviewed the financial evidence presented in this case? Yes, Your Honor. The Baltimore PD has been working in conjunction with federal authorities to investigate potential financial crimes associated with Wright and Henderson Development and its principals. And have you reached any preliminary conclusions? We have. Based on the evidence, there appears to be probable cause for charges including wire fraud, tax evasion, and financial institution fraud. We're preparing to present these findings to the state's attorney's office this week. This revelation that criminal charges were imminent regardless of the divorce outcome visibly shook Alexander. For the first time, the full consequences of his actions appeared to register on his face. As the day's testimony concluded, Judge Morales announced she would deliver her ruling on the divorce and asset distribution the following morning. Given the substantial evidence presented and the ongoing criminal investigations, I'm extending the freeze on all disputed assets until a final determination is made. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as all parties exited. Catherine expertly guided Amber through the crowd to a waiting car, deflecting questions with practiced ease. Mrs. Wright has presented her case in court today. We'll have comments after the judge's ruling tomorrow. In the privacy of the car, Amber finally allowed her exhaustion to show. That was intense. You did remarkably well, Catherine assured her, particularly given your recent medical procedures. Alexander, on the other hand, did not fare so well under cross-examination. No, Amber agreed, a grim satisfaction in her voice. He didn't. The detective's testimony was unexpected but helpful to our case. Criminal charges significantly strengthen our position regarding asset distribution. What happens now? Amber asked. Tonight we prepare for tomorrow's ruling. Alexander's team will likely attempt to salvage what they can, possibly offering a settlement before the judge rules. I won't settle, Amber said firmly. Not after everything that's come to light. I didn't think you would. Catherine's smile was approving. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be another challenging day. Amber returned to the Guilford house with Melissa, who had attended the entire proceeding in silent support. The house felt different now, less a reminder of her marriage and more a symbol of what she had survived. You were amazing, Melissa said as they settled in the kitchen with takeout containers. The way you sat there completely composed while all that evidence came out. I wanted to stand up and cheer when Catherine cornered Alexander about booking that New York trip. It was satisfying, Amber admitted, but also sad, in a way, hearing it all laid out like that. 12 years reduced to financial transactions and betrayals. Melissa studied her friend carefully. Do you still love him? After everything? No, Amber said after a moment's reflection, but I mourn who I thought he was. That person never existed, except in my mind. They were interrupted by Amber's phone ringing, the security company monitoring the house. Mrs. Right, we're showing the front gate has been accessed using a valid code. Are you expecting anyone? Amber tensed. No, I'm not. Who entered? The system shows Mr. Wright's access code was used approximately 30 seconds ago. Call the police, Amber instructed. Mr. Wright is not authorized to enter the property. She ended the call and turned to Melissa, adrenaline surging. Alexander's here. He used his code to get through the front gate. Melissa was already on her feet, moving toward the kitchen door to ensure it was locked. I'm calling 911 too. We don't know what state of mind he's in after today. Before she could complete the call, they heard the sound of a key in the front door, followed by Alexander's voice calling out, Amber, we need to talk. Stay here, Amber instructed Melissa, her voice low. If anything happens, get out through the back door. I'm not leaving you. Please, Mel, I need to handle this. Reluctantly, Melissa nodded, positioning herself near the kitchen's rear exit, while keeping her phone ready to call for help. Amber moved into the foyer just as Alexander entered the living room. He had changed from his court attire into more casual clothing, but his appearance was disheveled, hair uncombed, eyes slightly unfocused. The scent of whiskey hung in the air around him. You shouldn't be here, Alexander, Amber said calmly. The security company has already called the police. My house, he replied, gesturing expansively. Still my house until tomorrow. Not according to the temporary orders. You need to leave. Alexander moved further into the room, his movements loose in a way that suggested he'd had more than a few drinks. You've been busy, haven't you? Digging through my accounts, turning Vanessa against me, getting Travis to testify. Quite the performance for someone who just had brain surgery. You left me with plenty of time to think while I recovered alone, Amber replied, maintaining her position near the doorway. What do you want, Alexander? A conversation. Just us, without the lawyers and judges and spectators. His attempt at a charming smile failed, twisting into something bitter. Don't I deserve that much after 12 years? You lost the right to private conversations when you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. His expression darkened. That was Donovan's strategy, not mine. You approved it, just like you approved every other decision that's led you here. Amber crossed her arms, conscious of Melissa in the kitchen behind her, ready to call for help. The police will be here soon. Whatever you came to say it quickly. Alexander moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself another drink from the crystal decanter. You know, I built everything we have. Everything. While you were arranging pretty pictures at the museum, I was creating real value, real wealth. Is that what you came to say? To remind me of your importance? I came to offer you a deal, he said, turning to face her. One last chance to end this reasonably before tomorrow's ruling. There's no deal to make, Alexander. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence can be interpreted many ways. He took a long swallow of whiskey. Here's my offer. You drop the most serious allegations, agree to a standard divorce settlement, say 30% of disclosed assets, and I ensure your continued position at the museum through my connections on the board. Amber's laugh was genuine, if bitter. You're still trying to negotiate? After everything that came out in court today? Today was a setback, not the end. Alexander's confidence seemed to return as he spoke, as if convincing himself. Criminal investigations take years. Charges get reduced. People move on to new scandals. And Vanessa's testimony, the offshore accounts, your parents' evidence. Alexander's expression hardened. Vanessa can be handled. She's only cooperating to save herself. As for my parents, he made a dismissive gesture. They've always been disappointed in me, nothing new there. And me? Amber asked quietly. Did you ever consider how your actions would affect me? Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, perhaps the closest thing to genuine regret he was capable of feeling. You weren't supposed to find out this way. I was going to take care of you, set you up comfortably before I left. Take care of me, Amber repeated, the phrase igniting a fresh wave of anger, like I was an obligation to be managed rather than your wife of 12 years. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. I was a problem to solve, an item on your checklist before moving on to the life you really wanted. Amber took a step forward, her fear replaced by righteous fury. You want to know the irony, Alexander? If you had simply asked for a divorce, been honest about wanting to end our marriage, I would have given you one. Without the investigations, without exposing your fraud, without destroying everything you built. Alexander's face contorted, the facade of reasonable negotiation crumbling. You think you've won? Tomorrow's ruling is just the beginning. I still have resources you don't know about, connections you can't imagine. You'll never be free of me, Amber. Never. Is that a threat? It's a promise. He set down his glass with exaggerated care. When you're alone in this big empty house, when the lawyers and friends have moved on to the next drama, when your precious museum realizes how toxic your name has become, remember this moment. Remember you chose this. No, Alexander. You chose this every step of the way. Amber stood her ground as he approached, refusing to show fear despite the dangerous glint in his eye. You chose to betray our marriage. You chose to abandon me during brain surgery. You chose to hide assets and commit fraud. And now you're choosing to threaten me in my own home. His hand shot out suddenly, gripping her arm with bruising force. This is my home. Everything here is mine. Let go of me. Amber's voice remained steady despite the pain. Now. Or what? His grip tightened. You'll call the police? Claim I attacked you? Add it to your list of grievances for the judge tomorrow? She doesn't need to call anyone. Melissa's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Her phone held up. I'm already on with 911 and I'm recording every word of this. The police are 3 minutes out. Alexander released Amber's arm as if burned, stumbling back a step. "This is a private conversation between husband and wife. You have no right—" "Actually, Mr. Wright," came another voice from the front hallway, "she has every right to report a potential assault in progress." Detective Michael Torres stood in the entrance, badge displayed, expression grimly professional. "I was in the neighborhood following up on Mrs. Wright's security call. Convenient timing." Alexander's face drained of color as he realized his miscalculation. The detective who had testified about potential criminal charges was now witnessing his threatening behavior toward Amber. "This isn't what it looks like," Alexander began, backing away from Amber. "We were just talking—" "With your hand gripping her arm hard enough to leave bruises?" Torres stepped into the room, positioning himself between Alexander and Amber. "I saw enough to form my own conclusions, sir." Two uniformed officers appeared behind Torres, responding to the 911 call. "Everything okay here, Detective?" "Mr. Wright was just leaving," Torres replied, his gaze never leaving Alexander. "Unless Mrs. Wright wants to press charges for assault." Amber considered the question, studying Alexander's face, the man she had once loved, now reduced to a desperate, dangerous stranger. "Not tonight," she finally said, "but I want him removed from the property and barred from returning." Torres nodded to the officers, who moved to escort Alexander out. "Mr. Wright, I suggest you go quietly. You're already facing serious charges, don't add to them." As the officers led him toward the door, Alexander turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Amber." "Yes, it is," she replied quietly. "It's been over since you chose Vanessa over me while I was having brain surgery. Everything since then has just been consequences." After Alexander was escorted from the property, Torres remained briefly to take statements from both Amber and Melissa. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," the detective said as he prepared to leave. "Based on the financial evidence I've reviewed, Mr. Wright doesn't respond well when he's not in control." "Will this incident affect the criminal investigation?" Amber asked. "It certainly doesn't help his case," Torres replied. "Threatening a key witness tends to suggest consciousness of guilt. I've added tonight's events to my report for the state's attorney." After Torres departed, with a patrol car assigned to monitor the house overnight, Amber sank onto the sofa, the adrenaline ebbing and leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Are you okay?" Melissa asked, examining the forming bruise on Amber's arm. "We should document this for tomorrow's hearing." "I'm fine," Amber assured her, though the encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "He's desperate, that's all. He sees everything slipping away." "Desperate men are dangerous," Melissa pointed out. "Promise me you'll be careful. Just because the divorce is almost over doesn't mean Alexander will accept defeat gracefully." Amber nodded, understanding the warning all too well. Tonight had revealed a side of Alexander she had glimpsed only fleetingly during their marriage, a man who viewed people as possessions, who believed his wealth and status entitled him to whatever he wanted. Now that those props were being stripped away, what remained was far more volatile than she had anticipated. The courthouse was even more crowded the following morning, news of Alexander's confrontation with Amber having leaked to the press overnight. Security was visibly enhanced, with additional officers stationed throughout the courtroom. Amber entered alongside Catherine, both women projecting calm confidence despite the anxious energy permeating the room. Alexander arrived separately with his legal team, looking significantly worse than the previous day. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, the perfectly groomed executive replaced by a man clearly coming apart at the seams. Judge Morales called the court to order promptly at 9 a.m., wasting no time with preliminaries. "Before I deliver my ruling on asset distribution, I must address an incident reported to this court this morning. Mr. Wright, it has come to my attention that you violated the temporary orders by entering Mrs. Wright's residence last night without permission, resulting in a police response. Would you care to explain this before I proceed?" Alexander's attorney rose quickly. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges visiting the marital home to discuss settlement options. There was a misunderstanding about access rights, nothing more. A misunderstanding that resulted in a bruised arm for Mrs. Wright?" Judge Morales' tone was ice. "Detective Torres's report indicates physical intimidation bordering on assault. No charges were filed, Your Honor," Donovan pointed out hastily. "Mrs. Wright's generosity in that regard does not mitigate the violation of this court's orders." Judge Morales fixed Alexander with a stern gaze. Mr. Wright, your behavior demonstrates a troubling pattern of disregard for both legal constraints and basic decency. This will factor into my ruling today. She turned her attention to the documents before her. Having reviewed all evidence presented, witness testimony and financial records, I'm prepared to rule on the equitable distribution of marital assets. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Morales methodically outlined her decision, beginning with a summary of the factors considered under Maryland law: length of marriage, age and health of each party, contributions to family wealth, circumstances leading to the dissolution of marriage, and, most significantly, evidence of financial misconduct. The court finds compelling evidence that Mr. Wright engaged in systematic efforts to conceal marital assets through offshore accounts and shell companies, beginning approximately 14 months ago. This constitutes fraudulent conveyance under Maryland law, an attempt to deprive Mrs. Wright of her rightful share of marital property. She continued, addressing each category of assets in turn, her rulings increasingly favorable to Amber with each pronouncement. The Guilford residence shall become the sole property of Mrs. Wright, with Mr. Wright required to execute a quitclaim deed within 30 days. Mrs. Wright shall receive 70% of all identified investment accounts, including those Mr. Wright attempted to conceal offshore. The court is ordering repatriation of all foreign accounts with verification by a court-appointed trustee. Regarding Wright and Henderson development, the court acknowledges the company's uncertain future given pending criminal investigations. However, the value of Mr. Wright's 62% ownership stake as of the date of separation shall be assessed by an independent evaluator, with Mrs. Wright awarded 65% of that determined value. The ruling continued, systematically dismantling Alexander's financial empire and reassigning the majority of assets to Amber, a distribution far more favorable than the standard Maryland divorce settlement, justified by Alexander's extraordinary misconduct, both financially and personally. As Judge Morales concluded her asset rulings, she addressed one final matter. Given evidence that Mr. Wright abandoned Mrs. Wright during a life-threatening medical crisis, demonstrating extreme cruelty, the court is also awarding punitive alimony of $15,000 monthly for a period of 5 years. Alexander's face had grown increasingly pale throughout the ruling, his attorneys frantically making notes and whispering among themselves. By the time Judge Morales finished, he sat motionless, staring straight ahead, as the full impact of the judgment settled over him. Additionally, Judge Morales continued, this court is referring all evidence of financial crimes to the appropriate authorities for criminal prosecution. Mr. Wright, while this concludes the divorce proceedings, you likely face further legal consequences for your actions. She struck her gavel. This court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in murmurs and movement as reporters rushed to file their stories. Amber remained seated, momentarily overwhelmed by the finality of it all. After weeks of struggle, evidence gathering, court appearances, and personal danger, it was over. She had won, completely and irrevocably. Catherine leaned close. A decisive victory. Judge Morales's ruling exceeds even our most optimistic projections. What happens now? Amber asked, watching as Alexander was surrounded by his legal team, their expressions grave. Now we enforce the judgment. My office will handle all the transfers, property assignments, and financial distributions. You won't have to interact with Alexander directly again. Amber nodded, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her, relief, vindication, but also a surprising emptiness. The battle that had consumed her life since her diagnosis was suddenly concluded, leaving an uncertain future in its wake. As they prepared to leave, Alexander broke away from his attorneys and approached, ignoring Catherine's warning gesture. Congratulations, he said, his voice flat. You've won everything. I hope it brings you the happiness you think you deserve. This wasn't about happiness, Alexander, Amber replied quietly. It was about justice. Justice. He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. You've ruined me. My reputation, my company, my future, all destroyed. If that's your idea of justice, then you've become as ruthless as you accused me of being. The difference is, you earned this outcome. Every step of the way you chose actions that led here. Amber met his gaze steadily. I didn't destroy you, Alexander. You did that yourself. Before he could respond, court officers moved between them, escorting Amber and Catherine toward a private exit to avoid the press gathered outside. In the car, driving away from the courthouse, Amber finally allowed herself to process the morning's events. "It doesn't feel how I expected," she admitted to Catherine. "I thought I'd feel triumphant, I guess." "That's common," Catherine assured her. "High-conflict divorces take an emotional toll, even when the outcome is favorable. The sense of closure often comes later, after you've had time to process everything." "And the criminal charges. Will Alexander actually go to prison?" "Based on the evidence uncovered, it's likely. The federal investigation is substantial, with multiple witnesses cooperating against him, but that process will take time, possibly years of legal maneuvering before a final resolution." Amber nodded, gazing out at the Baltimore streets passing by. The city looked the same as it had weeks ago, when she had first collapsed in her kitchen, yet everything had changed irrevocably. Her phone buzzed with a text from Travis. "Vanessa just resigned, effective immediately. Board meeting emergency session to determine company's future. Thank you for your courage." Another text followed, this one from Daniel at the museum. "Everyone here is celebrating the news. Your office is waiting whenever you're ready to return. No pressure, just support." Messages continued arriving throughout the day, from colleagues, friends, even acquaintances who had remained silent during the proceedings, now eager to align themselves with the victor. The Baltimore Sun was running a feature on "The Woman Who Brought Down Alexander Wright," while business publications were analyzing the potential ripple effects through Baltimore's development community. By evening, exhaustion had overtaken Amber. She sat in her garden, truly hers now according to Judge Morales' ruling, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Melissa joined her, placing a glass of wine on the table beside her. "To victory," Melissa said, raising her own glass. "And to new beginnings." Amber smiled, clinking her glass against her friend's. "I'm not sure I know what those look like yet." "That's the beautiful part," Melissa replied. "You get to decide, without Alexander's shadow looming over you. I keep thinking about something Alexander said last night, that I'll never be free of him. In some ways, he's right. This scandal, the divorce, the criminal charges, they'll always be part of my story now." "Only if you let them define you," Melissa countered. "The woman who survived brain surgery, exposed a financial criminal, and reclaimed her life? That's a pretty powerful narrative to build from." Amber considered this perspective, realizing the truth in it. The past months had revealed a strength within her she hadn't known existed, a resilience that had carried her through medical crises, betrayal, and legal battles. "The museum called again," she said after a moment. "They want me to curate a special exhibition on resilience in modern art, pieces that survived war, natural disasters, attempted destruction. That sounds perfect for you right now." "I think so too." Amber took a sip of wine, realizing it was the first moment of genuine peace she had experienced since her diagnosis. "Not today, though. Today I just want to sit here and breathe." As night fell over Baltimore, Amber Wright, no longer defined by her marriage or her husband's betrayal, allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, neither victim nor avenger, but a woman who had faced extraordinary challenges and emerged stronger. The price of Alexander's betrayal had been high, but in the end, he was the one who had lost everything that mattered, while she had discovered resources within herself that no court could award and no betrayal could diminish. 1 year later, the Baltimore Museum of Art buzzed with anticipation as guests filed into the newly renovated East Wing Gallery. Staff hurried through final preparations, adjusting lighting and straightening placards beside powerful works of art. Tonight marked the opening of Fractured: The Art of Resilience, Amber Wright's triumphant return to curatorial prominence and her most personal exhibition to date. In the small office behind the gallery, Amber stood before a mirror, studying her reflection. At 39, she looked different than she had a year ago. Her hair had grown back fully, now styled in a confident bob that revealed, rather than concealed, the faint surgical scar at her temple. She had chosen to wear it as a badge of honor, a visible reminder of everything she had survived. 5 minutes to opening remarks, Daniel said, appearing in the doorway. Her once assistant, now co-curator, had been instrumental in helping Amber conceptualize the exhibition during her gradual return to work. "Nervous?" "Surprisingly, no," Amber replied, smoothing the fabric of her emerald dress, the same color Alexander had once told her he disliked. "After everything that's happened, public speaking seems relatively straightforward." Daniel smiled. "The mayor just arrived." And Catherine Zhang is here too. I'll be right out. Alone again, Amber took a moment to center herself. The past year had been a journey of recovery, both physically and emotionally. The shunt had been removed permanently 8 months ago, her brain fully healed according to Dr. Weiss's careful monitoring. The psychological healing had taken longer, with weekly therapy sessions helping Amber process the complex aftermath of betrayal, divorce, and public scrutiny. The exhibition she was about to present represented the culmination of that journey, a collection of works by artists who had faced destruction, trauma, or betrayal, and transformed those experiences into powerful statements of resilience. Each piece had been selected with meticulous care, the collection telling a story that paralleled her own, without explicitly referencing it. Taking a deep breath, Amber stepped out into the gallery where Baltimore's cultural and civic leaders had gathered. She moved through the crowd graciously, accepting congratulations and well wishes with genuine warmth. These were her people, the arts community that had stood by her throughout the scandal, offering support without judgment. At precisely 7 o'clock, the museum director introduced Amber to enthusiastic applause. Standing at the podium, surveying the faces turned expectantly toward her, Amber felt a sense of completion, the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Fractured. The art of resilience explores what happens when our foundations are shaken, when the narratives we've constructed about our lives, our relationships, our very identities, are suddenly revealed to be built on unstable ground." She gestured to the gallery around them. Each work in this exhibition has survived an attempt at its destruction. Some bear visible scars, like Kobayashi's After the Flood, created from materials salvaged from the tsunami that destroyed his studio. Others conceal their damage beneath restored surfaces, their history known only to those who look closely enough to see the careful repairs. Amber paused, aware of the murmurs of appreciation rippling through the audience. "What interests me most is not the damage itself, but what emerges afterward. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, treating the breakage as part of the object's history rather than something to disguise. The resulting piece is often more beautiful, more valuable, and more authentic than it was before." Her gaze swept the crowd, momentarily catching Catherine Zhang's approving nod. "This exhibition invites us to consider our own fractures, personal, cultural, societal, not as flaws to be hidden, but as essential components of who we are becoming. I hope these works inspire you as they have inspired me, to see that what breaks us often becomes the source of our greatest strength." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. As Amber stepped away from the podium to officially open the exhibition, she was engulfed by well-wishers, colleagues, patrons, and friends, eager to congratulate her on what the Baltimore Sun would later call the most thought-provoking exhibition the city has seen in a decade. Later, as guests circulated through the gallery, Catherine approached, elegant as always in a tailored black suit. "Magnificent work," she said, embracing Amber warmly, "though I suspect many people here are missing the autobiographical elements." Amber smiled. "That was intentional. The story is there for those who know where to look." "Speaking of stories," Catherine lowered her voice, "I thought you should hear this from me before it breaks in the news tomorrow. Alexander's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. The prosecutors are recommending 7 to 10 years. Though Amber had been expecting this news, Alexander had pleaded guilty to multiple financial crimes 3 months ago. Hearing the potential sentence still sent a jolt through her system. That long? The evidence was overwhelming, and his attempt to flee to the Cayman Islands while on bail didn't help his case. The judge is unlikely to be lenient. Alexander's attempted escape had been headline news for days. The disgraced developer arrested at Baltimore-Washington International Airport with fake identification and $100,000 in cash, attempting to board a private charter to Georgetown, Grand Cayman. It had been his final desperate act, coming 6 months after the divorce when the federal indictment made it clear that criminal charges were inevitable. "I see," Amber said, processing the information. "Thank you for telling me. Are you all right?" Catherine studied her former client carefully. "It's natural to have complicated feelings about this, even after everything he did." "I'm fine," Amber assured her. "Just thinking about how far we've both come from that hospital room where we first met. Different trajectories entirely." Catherine nodded in understanding. "Very different indeed. Your exhibition is proof of that." As Catherine moved away to speak with other guests, Amber found herself before one of the exhibition's centerpieces, a large canvas that had been slashed during a museum theft, then meticulously restored. The violence of the cut remained visible up close, a thin line of disruption across an otherwise peaceful landscape. "It's extraordinary work," came a deep voice beside her. "The restoration, I mean. You can still see the damage, but it's been incorporated into the piece rather than erased." Amber turned to find James Bennett watching her with warm hazel eyes. At 42, the architect had an easy confidence and a genuine interest in art that had drawn her attention when they first met at a museum fundraiser 3 months ago. She'd been cautious about dating, her trust damaged by Alexander's betrayal, but James's patience and straightforwardness had gradually worn down her defenses. "That was the curator's intention," she explained, gesturing to the painting. "The artist initially wanted a perfect restoration that would hide the cut completely. The curator convinced him that acknowledging the damage made the piece more compelling. Like your exhibition thesis," James noted, "embracing the fractures rather than concealing them." "Exactly." Amber smiled, appreciating his understanding. "I didn't expect to see you tonight. I thought you were in Philadelphia for that historical preservation conference. I came back early. Wouldn't miss your big night." James kept a respectful distance, aware of the professional setting. Their relationship was still new, still careful, both of them carrying histories that had taught them caution. "It's magnificent, Amber. Truly. Thank you." She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded gallery. "Would you like a personal tour later, when things quiet down?" "I'd like nothing more." The evening continued successfully, with critics and patrons alike praising the exhibition's power and cohesion. By the time the last guests departed, Amber was exhausted but deeply satisfied. She had accomplished what she set out to do, create something meaningful from her experience without allowing it to define her. As promised, she showed James through the gallery after hours, explaining the careful curation decisions behind each piece. They ended before a small, unassuming work near the exit, a Japanese ceramic bowl repaired with gold seams, its fractures transformed into the most beautiful aspect of the piece. "This is my favorite," Amber admitted. "It reminds me that some things become more valuable after they're broken." James studied the piece thoughtfully. "Do you believe that's true of people too?" "I'd like to think so." She turned to face him directly. "I know I'm not the same person I was before everything happened with Alexander. Better in some ways, perhaps more guarded in others. More authentic, I'd say." James's expression was open, honest. "The Amber I've come to know doesn't pretend or perform. There's a directness to you that's rare. Trauma will do that," she said with a small smile. "Strip away the pretense." "Dinner?" James suggested as they prepared to leave. "I know a quiet place in Fells Point where we can actually hear each other talk." Amber hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." As they walked out of the museum together, Amber was struck by how different this felt from her years with Alexander, the careful consideration of her own desires rather than automatic accommodation, the space for her own thoughts and feelings. James didn't try to dazzle or dominate. He simply walked beside her, present and engaged. It was a small moment, but significant. Another step in the long process of rebuilding a life that had been shattered and was now being carefully, intentionally restored. The Baltimore Sun's Arts section the following Sunday featured a glowing review of Fractured, with a prominent photograph of Amber standing beside the kintsugi bowl. The business section of the same paper carried a very different story. Former developer Wright faces decade in prison for financial crimes. The contrast between the two articles, one celebrating creation, the other documenting destruction, wasn't lost on Amber as she read the paper over Sunday coffee. The financial crimes article detailed the full extent of Alexander's fall. Wright and Henderson Development had been dissolved, its legitimate assets acquired by competitors, its fraudulent dealings exposed. Travis Henderson had received immunity for his cooperation and was now working as a consultant on responsible development practices. Vanessa Cole had served 6 months under house arrest for her lesser role in the scheme and had relocated to Chicago. And Alexander, once Baltimore's golden boy of real estate, was facing years in federal prison, his reputation destroyed, his wealth confiscated, his future bleak. Amber set aside the paper, reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them both to this point. A little over a year ago, she had been the supportive wife, believing in Alexander's vision, accommodating his ambitions, overlooking the warning signs of his changing behavior. Now their roles were entirely reversed. She was thriving professionally and beginning a promising new relationship, while Alexander had lost everything. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a Boston area code. Hello? Amber? It's Sandra Wright, Alexander's mother. They had spoken only once since the divorce was finalized, a brief, awkward conversation following Alexander's arrest at the airport. Sandra, this is unexpected. I know, and I apologize for intruding on your Sunday. The older woman's voice carried its usual New England reserve, but with an underlying tension. I'm calling because, well, Jonathan and I are in Baltimore. Alexander asked to see us before his sentencing, and while we're here, we wondered if you might be willing to meet with us. Amber's instinct was to refuse immediately. What could possibly be gained from meeting with her former in-laws now? Yet something in Sandra's tone, a complexity beyond simple duty, gave her pause. May I ask why? A hesitation on the line. There are things you should know, Amber, about Alexander's past, about patterns we should have recognized sooner, things that might help you make sense of what happened. Curiosity overcame caution. When were you thinking? This afternoon, perhaps? We're staying at the Four Seasons. We could meet you somewhere public, if that would make you more comfortable. The cafe at the Walters Art Museum, 3 o'clock, Amber suggested, naming a neutral location where she had connections if anything went awry. Thank you, Amber. We'll be there. After ending the call, Amber immediately phoned Melissa, who reacted with predictable concern. You're meeting with Alexander's parents? Why? What could they possibly have to say that matters now? I don't know, Amber admitted. But Sandra mentioned Alexander's past. Patterns they should have recognized. I'm curious. It could be a manipulation, Alexander trying to get to you through his parents before his sentencing. Possibly. Amber had considered that angle. But I'll be in a public place, and I'm not the same person who once believed everything Alexander said. I can handle this. Melissa sighed audibly. Fine. But text me when you arrive and when you leave. And if you get any weird vibes at all, walk out immediately. The Walters Art Museum cafe was moderately busy when Amber arrived that afternoon. She selected a table with a clear view of the entrance, positioned so her back was against a wall. The habits of vigilance developed over the past year had become second nature. Sandra and Jonathan Wright entered precisely at 3, both appearing older than when Amber had last seen them. Jonathan's once robust frame seemed diminished, his shoulders slightly stooped. Sandra maintained her elegant bearing, but new lines around her eyes suggested recent strain. Amber, Sandra said as they approached, thank you for agreeing to see us. Of course. Amber gestured to the chairs across from her. Please sit down. After ordering coffee, an awkward silence descended until Jonathan cleared his throat. We saw the article about your exhibition. It sounds remarkable. Thank you. It's been well received. Amber, Sandra interjected, clearly preferring directness to small talk. We asked to meet because we owe you an explanation, perhaps an apology as well, for Alexander's actions. Those aren't your responsibility. Not directly, no, but for what we knew and didn't share. Sandra exchanged a glance with her husband before continuing. Alexander's behavior with you, the financial deception, the betrayal, the calculated manipulation, it wasn't the first time. Amber's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. What do you mean? Before you, Jonathan said heavily, there was Catherine Lowell, Alexander's college girlfriend. They were together for 3 years, engaged for the last 6 months. He systematically drained her trust fund before disappearing 2 weeks before the wedding. And Elizabeth Chen, Sandra added, a brief marriage in his late 20s that ended when she discovered he'd been leading a double life, another apartment, another woman, separate financial arrangements. Amber set down her cup carefully. I didn't know about any previous marriage. It was annulled quickly and quietly. Alexander was very careful to ensure all records were sealed. Sandra's expression conveyed years of painful awareness. We helped him, Amber, paid settlements, smoothed things over, believed his explanations that these women had somehow misunderstood or taken advantage. Why are you telling me this now? Amber asked, working to keep her voice steady despite the shock of these revelations. Because we've finally accepted that our son has a pattern of behavior that we enabled, Jonathan replied, genuine remorse in his voice. We thought we were protecting him, But we were just making it possible for him to hurt more people, including you. We should have told you when we first learned about the offshore accounts, Sandra added. But family loyalty, it's a powerful force, even when misplaced. Amber absorbed this information, pieces of Alexander's past suddenly illuminating aspects of their marriage she had never fully understood, his reluctance to discuss former relationships, his careful compartmentalization of different aspects of his life, the ease with which he constructed elaborate deceptions. "Did you tell Alexander you were meeting me today?" she asked. "No," Sandra said firmly. "This isn't about him. It's about acknowledging our role in what happened to you. And perhaps," Jonathan added hesitantly, "offering some context that might help you move forward, knowing that none of this was your fault, that Alexander has been perfecting these behaviors for decades." The conversation continued for another hour, Sandra and Jonathan sharing details about Alexander's history that revealed a consistent pattern of charm, manipulation, exploitation, and abandonment. The man Amber had married was not an anomaly created by success and temptation, but rather the latest iteration of a character Alexander had been refining since college. "He's asked us to speak at his sentencing," Sandra said as they prepared to leave, "to attest to his character, request leniency from the judge." "Will you?" Amber asked. "No." Jonathan's response was immediate and firm. "Not this time. We've enabled him enough." As they parted ways outside the museum, Sandra hesitated, then reached for Amber's hand. "I want you to know, we always thought you were the best thing that ever happened to Alexander. We hoped you would be the one to change him." "That wasn't my responsibility," Amber replied gently. "And it wasn't possible." "No," Sandra agreed, her eyes sad but clear. "We understand that now." Walking home through Mount Vernon Square, Amber found herself processing this new information, not just about Alexander, but about the nature of patterns and responsibility. Alexander hadn't suddenly transformed from loving husband to calculating betrayer. He had always been the latter, temporarily playing the role of the former. The realization was both painful and liberating. Painful to acknowledge that the man she had loved had never truly existed, liberating to understand that no action or choice on her part could have prevented what happened. Alexander's betrayal had been inevitable, a manifestation of his character, rather than a response to any deficiency in hers. Back in her Guildford home, now fully renovated and redecorated to reflect her personal aesthetic, rather than the compromise of their marriage, Amber called James. He listened attentively as she recounted the meeting with Sandra and Jonathan, offering neither judgment nor platitudes, simply space for her to process. "How do you feel about learning all this?" he asked when she finished. "Validated in a strange way," Amber admitted. "All those moments during our marriage when something felt off, but I couldn't quite identify why, they make sense now. Alexander wasn't just hiding an affair, he was hiding who he fundamentally was." "That's a profound betrayal," James observed, "beyond the financial deception or even the relationship with Vanessa." "Yes." Amber moved to her study window, looking out at the garden she had replanted entirely after the divorce. New varieties, new colors, no remnants of what had been there during her marriage. "It makes me question everything about those 12 years. Was any of it real? Was I just another Catherine Lowell or Elizabeth Chen to him? A mark rather than a partner? I don't think anyone sustains a performance for 12 years without moments of genuine connection," James suggested. "But it doesn't diminish what he did or excuse it." "No, it doesn't." Amber sighed, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. "I should let you go. I'm not great company right now." "You don't have to be company, Amber," James replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You can just be yourself, processing something difficult. I'm not going anywhere." His words, simple, direct, honest, contrasted so sharply with Alexander's elaborate constructions that Amber felt tears threatening. "Thank you for that." After they ended the call, Amber found herself drawn to her home office, where a single box contained the remnants of her marriage that she hadn't yet disposed of: photo albums, cards, mementos from trips they had taken together. She had kept them not out of sentimentality but as evidence, physical proof that the life she had thought she was living had actually existed. Now, with the knowledge that Alexander had been playing a role throughout their relationship, these items took on a different significance. They were artifacts of an elaborate deception, props in a performance designed to gain her trust while systematically preparing for her eventual abandonment. Melissa called later that evening to check in, concerned about the meeting with the Wrights. "So Alexander is basically a sociopath," she concluded, after Amber relayed what she had learned. "A serial con artist who targets women, exploits them, then moves on to the next victim." "That's oversimplifying," Amber cautioned. "But yes, there's clearly a pattern of calculated behavior that suggests something fundamentally broken in how he relates to others. Does this change how you feel about the divorce outcome or the criminal charges?" Amber considered the question carefully. "Not really. Whether Alexander's behavior stems from a personality disorder or simple greed doesn't change what he did or the consequences he deserves to face. But it changes how you see those 12 years, Melissa suggested perceptively. "Yes." Amber traced her finger over the surgical scar at her temple, a habit she had developed when deep in thought. "It makes me question everything. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every decision we made together. Was it all strategic on his part? Was I just a means to an end from the beginning?" "I don't think it works that cleanly," Melissa replied. "People like Alexander, they're not faking everything all the time. They have genuine moments, real connections. They just don't value those connections the way others do. They're disposable when no longer useful. That's the part I'm struggling with," Amber admitted. "Accepting that Alexander might have truly cared for me in his way, while simultaneously planning his exit strategy from the beginning. The ultimate compartmentalization," Melissa agreed. "No wonder you feel like the past 12 years are being rewritten." After the call ended, Amber returned to the box of mementos, this time with a different perspective. Perhaps the truth wasn't that every moment had been a lie, but rather that Alexander had been capable of genuine feeling without genuine commitment, of creating connection without valuing its permanence. The next morning, Amber made a decision she had been contemplating for months. She contacted Detective Torres, who had remained in touch periodically regarding Alexander's case. "I've been asked to make a victim impact statement at Alexander's sentencing," she explained when they met for coffee. "I'm trying to decide whether to participate." Torres, whose investigation had expanded from the initial financial crimes to encompass Alexander's entire history of deception, nodded in understanding. "Many victims choose not to. It can be re-traumatizing to face the perpetrator in court. It's not fear of facing Alexander," Amber clarified. "It's question of purpose. What would my statement accomplish? Vindication. He's already been convicted. Punishment? The judge will decide that regardless of what I say. Closure, perhaps," Torres suggested. "A chance to speak your truth directly to him, with the power dynamic entirely reversed." Amber considered this perspective. "Maybe. But I wonder if true closure comes from confrontation or from moving forward regardless of the past." "Only you can answer that," Torres said. "But I can tell you this. In my experience, victims who reclaim their narrative, whether through testimony or simply living well afterward, tend to heal more completely than those who remain silent." The conversation stayed with Amber as she returned to work, immersing herself in planning for her next exhibition. The success of Fractured had cemented her professional reputation and opened new opportunities, including an offer to guest curate at the National Gallery in Washington the following year. In the weeks leading up to Alexander's sentencing, Baltimore society buzzed with speculation about what punishment the disgraced developer would face. The story had all the elements the media loved: wealth, betrayal, crime, and the dramatic fall of a once prominent figure. Several profile pieces appeared, attempting to understand the man behind the crimes. One particularly in-depth article in Baltimore Magazine titled "The Right Deception" tracked Alexander's history back to his college days, interviewing former associates and partners who revealed a consistent pattern of charm, exploitation, and abandonment. Reading it, Amber recognized elements of her own experience echoed across decades: the same tactics, the same promises, the same calculated exit strategies when relationships no longer served his purposes. The most revealing comment came from a former business partner who had worked with Alexander before the formation of Wright and Henderson. "Alex doesn't see people as people. They're instruments, tools to be used in building whatever he wants at the moment. The scariest part is, I think he believes his own performance while he's giving it. He's not lying so much as temporarily becoming whoever he needs to be to get what he wants." This insight resonated with Amber's own evolving understanding of her former husband. Alexander hadn't been pretending to love her. He had temporarily become a man who loved her until that identity no longer served his purposes. 2 days before the sentencing hearing, Amber received an unexpected letter delivered to her office at the museum. The return address showed it had been sent from the detention center, where Alexander awaited sentencing. Her first instinct was to destroy it unopened, but curiosity prevailed. Inside was a single page of handwritten text. Amber, words are inadequate to express the regret I feel for the pain I've caused you. I won't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it, and you've moved beyond needing to give it. I write only to acknowledge what I did, and to say that you were the one person who might have changed me had I allowed it. I've had much time to reflect in here, stripped of the distractions and possessions that defined me for so long. The man I see clearly now is not someone I'm proud to have been. The pattern my parents likely told you about, yes, I know they met with you, began long before we met and continued despite my genuine feelings for you. That's the truth I wish you to know. However manipulative my actions became, my feelings for you were real. You were different from the others. With you, I glimpsed the possibility of being better than I was. I chose not to take that path, returning instead to familiar patterns of deception and self-interest. That choice is my greatest regret. I face significant prison time, as you know. Whatever the sentence, I've already lost what mattered most, the life we might have had if I'd been capable of honesty and genuine partnership. I don't expect a response. I simply wanted you to know that in a life built on calculation and performance, what I felt for you contained elements of truth I rarely experienced elsewhere. Alexander Amber read the letter twice, trying to discern whether this too was manipulation. Another performance designed to elicit sympathy before sentencing. The Alexander she had come to understand was certainly capable of such calculation, yet there was something different in these words, an absence of the charm and persuasion that had always characterized his communications. No promises, no flattery, no attempt to rekindle connection or extract assistance. Just an acknowledgement of harm done and opportunities lost. She shared the letter with her therapist during their session that afternoon, seeking perspective on whether it represented genuine reflection or simply another tactic. Both can be true simultaneously, Dr. Parker suggested. Alexander may be genuinely reflecting on his choices, while also hoping this reflection influences how you might speak about him at sentencing. Human motivation is rarely pure. Do you think people like Alexander can change? Amber asked. Change requires several elements: insight into one's patterns, genuine remorse for harm caused, and consistent effort over time to develop new responses, Dr. Parker explained. Alexander seems to have achieved the first. Whether he's capable of the others remains to be seen, but that's not your concern anymore, Amber. Your focus needs to remain on your own healing, not his potential redemption. I know. Amber folded the letter, returning it to her bag. I'm still deciding whether to speak at the sentencing. What's holding you back? Amber considered the question carefully. I'm afraid of reopening wounds that have finally begun to heal, of giving Alexander power over my emotions again, even briefly. That's a valid concern, Dr. Parker acknowledged. But consider this. Your voice at sentencing wouldn't be for Alexander's benefit, but for your own. An opportunity to speak your truth in a forum where he has no ability to manipulate or control the narrative. That evening, Amber met James for dinner at a small restaurant in Harbour East, ironically, not far from where Wright and Henderson's offices had once been. As they enjoyed the meal, Amber found herself studying James with renewed appreciation for his straightforward nature. Their relationship had developed slowly over the past months, both of them bringing caution born from past experiences. James had been divorced for 5 years, his marriage to an ambitious corporate attorney having collapsed under the weight of competing priorities and fundamental incompatibility. Unlike Alexander, James spoke openly about his past, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned, the growth he continued to pursue. I've decided to speak at Alexander's sentencing, Amber told him over dessert, not to influence the judge's decision, but to complete my own story. James nodded, his expression supportive. I think that's brave. Not brave so much as necessary, Amber clarified. I've spent a year rebuilding my life apart from Alexander's shadow. Speaking at his sentencing is a way of acknowledging that connection while asserting its conclusion. Would you like me to be there? James offered. Not inside the courtroom, but nearby for support afterward. The offer touched Amber deeply, not because she needed protection, but because it represented genuine partnership rather than control. Yes, I think I would. The courtroom was packed on the day of Alexander's sentencing. Media representatives filled the designated area, while various figures from Baltimore's business community occupied much of the remaining space, some there to witness justice, others perhaps to reassure themselves that Alexander's crimes were exceptional rather than indicative of wider practices. Amber sat in the front row beside Catherine Zhang, who had offered to accompany her despite no longer representing her professionally. Their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship over the past year, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. When Alexander was led in by court officers, Amber was struck by how diminished he appeared. The confident, commanding presence that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a man in standard-issue detention center clothing, his shoulders slightly hunched, his once perfect hair grown out and unstyled. He glanced around the courtroom, his gaze briefly meeting Amber's before quickly looking away. The proceedings began with the prosecutor summarizing the charges to which Alexander had pleaded guilty: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and attempting to flee while on bail. The recommended sentence was presented: 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, plus restitution of approximately $6.4 million. Alexander's attorney argued for leniency, citing his client's cooperation after the initial arrest, lack of prior criminal record, and potential for rehabilitation. Character witnesses, notably fewer than might have been expected for someone once so prominent, spoke about Alexander's contributions to Baltimore's development and charitable activities. Then came the victim impact statements. Representatives from defrauded investment groups spoke first, describing the financial and professional damage Alexander's schemes had caused. Travis Henderson testified about the company employees who had lost jobs when Wright and Henderson collapsed. Finally, the judge called Amber's name. She rose, moving to the podium with measured steps, aware of all eyes following her progress. The courtroom fell silent as she arranged her prepared remarks, then looked directly at Alexander for the first time in months. "Your Honor, my name is Amber Wright. Until last year, I was married to the defendant for 12 years. Her voice was clear, steady, carrying easily through the hushed courtroom. I'm here today not to influence the court's decision regarding sentencing, but to ensure that the full impact of Alexander Wright's actions is understood." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The financial crimes outlined in this case represent only one dimension of the harm Alexander caused. Behind the dollar figures and legal terminology lies a pattern of calculated deception that extended beyond business into the most intimate aspects of human relationship. Amber described the discovery of Alexander's betrayal during her brain surgery, the systematic financial deception, and the attempted gaslighting when she confronted him, all without emotional embellishment, simply stating facts in a clear, measured tone. "When I was at my most vulnerable, facing a life-threatening medical crisis, Alexander chose to be with his mistress rather than by my side. When I discovered his betrayal, he attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent rather than face the consequences of his actions. When legal proceedings revealed the extent of his financial crimes, he attempted to flee the country rather than accept responsibility." She looked directly at Alexander as she continued. "These are not the impulsive mistakes of a man who temporarily lost his way. They are the deliberate choices of someone who views others as means to an end, rather than as human beings deserving of basic decency and respect." Alexander's gaze dropped to the table before him, unable to maintain eye contact. "I do not stand before you seeking vengeance or additional punishment. The legal system will determine appropriate consequences for the crimes committed. I speak today simply to ensure that the human cost of Alexander's actions, the betrayal of trust, the manipulation of vulnerability, the calculated exploitation of those who loved him, is acknowledged alongside the financial damage." Amber concluded by addressing not the judge but Alexander himself. "I have rebuilt my life in the wake of your betrayal. I have found strength I didn't know I possessed, created work that brings me fulfillment, and discovered relationships based on genuine respect rather than manipulation. The woman you abandoned during brain surgery, the woman you attempted to discredit and destroy when she discovered your deception, she not only survived but flourished. That is the final consequence of your actions that I wanted you to know." As she returned to her seat, the courtroom remained silent, the impact of her words hanging in the air. Catherine squeezed her hand briefly in support. The judge then asked Alexander if he wished to make a statement before sentencing. He rose slowly, approaching the podium with none of his former confidence. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rougher than Amber remembered, "I stand before you, having pleaded guilty to serious crimes that harmed many people, both professionally and personally. I accept full responsibility for these actions and the pain they caused." He paused, seeming to struggle with his prepared remarks. "I've heard the impact statements today, particularly Mrs. Wright's testimony. There is nothing I can say to undo the harm I've caused her or the others affected by my choices. I can only acknowledge that harm and express my profound regret." For a moment he appeared genuinely overcome, his composure cracking to reveal something raw beneath. "I betrayed not only legal and financial trust, but also the most fundamental human bonds. I cannot ask for forgiveness, only the opportunity to eventually demonstrate through actions rather than words that I understand the gravity of what I've done." The judge considered all statements before delivering her decision. 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and full restitution to all identified victims, including additional compensation to Amber for the attempted financial fraud specific to their marriage. "Mr. Wright," the judge concluded, "you used your intelligence and charisma to manipulate others for personal gain without regard for the destruction left in your wake. This sentence reflects not only the financial crimes to which you've pleaded guilty, but also the calculated nature of those crimes and the profound breach of trust they represent." As Alexander was led away by court officers, he glanced back once, his eyes meeting Amber's briefly. What passed between them in that moment wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but something simpler: acknowledgement. A silent recognition that their shared story had reached its conclusion, the final chapter written in this courtroom. Outside, James waited as promised, his steady presence a counterpoint to the emotional intensity of the proceedings. He asked no questions, simply offered his hand, which Amber took gratefully as they walked away from the courthouse. "It's over," she said simply. "How do you feel?" James asked, after they had walked several blocks in comfortable silence. "Lighter," Amber realized, somewhat surprised by her own response. "As if I've set down something heavy I've been carrying for too long." In the days that followed, Amber found herself experiencing an unexpected sense of completion. Alexander's sentencing represented the final resolution of their connection, legal, financial, and emotional. The man who had occupied so much space in her life for 12 years was now definitively consigned to her past. Media coverage of the sentencing was extensive, but mercifully brief. Baltimore's attention soon shifted to new developments, other scandals, fresh faces in the business community. Where Alexander Wright had once been a fixture in local headlines, he quickly became yesterday's news, his name appearing only occasionally in retrospective pieces about financial fraud or cautionary tales about due diligence in real estate investment. Life moved forward. Amber's exhibition traveled to museums in Philadelphia and New York, earning critical acclaim and establishing her reputation beyond Baltimore. The Baltimore Museum of Art offered her a promotion to senior curator, with expanded responsibilities and creative freedom. Her health remained stable, regular checkups with Dr. Weiss confirming complete recovery from the tumor and subsequent complications. 6 months after the sentencing, Amber received an unexpected call from Travis Henderson, who had successfully re-established himself as a consultant specializing in ethical development practices. "I'm working with a community coalition in East Baltimore," he explained. "They're planning an arts center as part of a neighborhood revitalization project. Your name came up repeatedly as someone who might help conceptualize the exhibition spaces." "That sounds intriguing," Amber replied, genuinely interested. "Is this a paid consultation or pro bono work?" "Paid, but modestly," Travis admitted. "The budget is limited, but the impact could be significant. This neighborhood has been underserved culturally for decades." "Send me the details," Amber said. "I'd like to help if I can." The project became an unexpected source of fulfillment, a chance to extend art beyond traditional museum spaces into communities where it might inspire new generations. Working with local artists and residents, Amber developed a vision for exhibition spaces that would showcase both established talents and emerging voices from the neighborhood itself. During one community meeting about the project, she met Elena Diaz, a high school art teacher, whose passion for her students' development reminded Amber of her own early mentors. They connected immediately, forming a friendship based on shared values and complementary perspectives. "You've changed," Eleanor observed one evening as they reviewed student portfolios for potential inclusion in the center's inaugural exhibition. "From when I first met you, I mean." "How so?" Amber asked, curious about this outside perspective. "You seemed careful at first, measured in your responses, hesitant to fully engage." Eleanor smiled. "Now you're more present, more willing to invest emotionally in the work and the people involved." Amber considered this assessment. "I was rebuilding trust in others and in myself when we first met, learning to distinguish between genuine connection and manipulation." "Because of your ex-husband?" Eleanor asked gently. She knew the basic outlines of Amber's story, as did most people in Baltimore's cultural community. "Partly, but also learning to trust my own judgment again." Amber sorted through a particularly promising set of photographs by a 17-year-old student. "For a long time after everything happened with Alexander, I questioned every decision, every instinct. I kept thinking I should have seen the signs earlier, should have protected myself better. That's not fair to yourself," Elena pointed out. "From what I understand, he fooled a lot of people, business partners, investors, banks." "True, but none of them lived with him for 12 years. Amber set down the portfolio she was reviewing. "The hardest part wasn't forgiving Alexander. It was forgiving myself for believing in him so completely." This truth, that self-forgiveness, had been more elusive than any other aspect of recovery, was something Amber had only recently come to understand. The anger toward Alexander had faded relatively quickly, replaced by a sort of detached pity for a man whose life had been built on performance rather than connection. But the disappointment in herself for having been deceived had lingered longer, a persistent undercurrent beneath her external rebuilding. Working on the Community Arts Center became part of that healing process, a way of channeling her expertise into something purely constructive, untainted by past betrayals or present doubts. The project progressed steadily through planning phases, securing additional funding and community support along the way. 1 year after Alexander's sentencing, 2 years after Amber's initial diagnosis and the cascade of revelations that followed, the East Baltimore Community Arts Center opened with a powerful inaugural exhibition featuring works by established artists alongside pieces by local students and community members. At the opening reception, surrounded by people celebrating art's power to transform and connect, Amber found herself experiencing a moment of profound clarity. The path from her hospital bed 2 years earlier to this vibrant community space represented not just personal recovery but evolution, becoming someone stronger, more authentic, and more engaged than the woman who had once defined herself primarily as Alexander Wright's wife. James stood nearby, chatting with Elena about architectural elements of the renovated building. Their relationship had deepened gradually over the months, built on mutual respect and deliberate transparency. Amber watched him, his animated gestures as he explained a structural detail, his attentive listening when Elena responded, and felt a surge of appreciation for his consistent authenticity. Later that evening, as they walked along the harbor promenade, James broached a subject they had been circling for weeks. "I've been offered a position with a historical preservation firm in D.C., he said. "It's an excellent opportunity, but it would mean relocating, or a significant commute." "When would you need to decide?" Amber asked, processing this unexpected development. "Within the next month." James stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Amber, I don't want to pressure you or rush anything between us, but I also don't want to make this decision without considering what it means for us." The old Amber, the one who had accommodated Alexander's career moves without question, might have immediately offered to make it work, to adapt her life around his opportunity. The new Amber took her time, considering her own needs alongside his. "I care about you deeply," she said finally. "But I've built something meaningful here in Baltimore, my position at the museum, the community center, connections that matter to me. I'm not ready to leave that behind." James nodded, unsurprised. "I wouldn't expect you to. What I'm really asking is whether you see us finding a way forward together, whether that means a commuting relationship for a while or some other arrangement we figure out together." "I do," Amber said, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "I see a future for us, James. One we build thoughtfully, considering both our needs rather than just one person's career. His smile was warm, genuine. That's all I needed to hear. The rest we can figure out step by step. As they continued their walk, plans and possibilities flowing between them, Amber reflected on the profound difference between this conversation and similar ones with Alexander years earlier. Where Alexander had presented decisions as fait accompli, expecting accommodation, James offered partnership, mutual consideration of individual needs within a shared future. The contrast crystallized how much had changed, not just in her circumstances, but in her fundamental understanding of what relationship should be. 3 years to the day after Amber's initial collapse in her kitchen, the moment that had inadvertently set everything in motion, she stood in her office at the Baltimore Museum of Art, preparing for a meeting with potential donors for her latest exhibition project. The morning's Baltimore Sun lay open on her desk, a small article circled in red. Former developer, right granted compassionate release due to terminal illness. The brief piece explained that Alexander, having served just over 2 years of his 8-year sentence, had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer and transferred to a medical facility for his remaining months. Amber had read the article twice, searching her emotions for a reaction. Anger, perhaps, that Alexander would escape serving his full sentence, or vindictive satisfaction that he faced his own health crisis without support. She found neither. Instead, she experienced a surprising emotional neutrality, recognition of factual information without accompanying turmoil. Alexander Wright, once the center of her world, had become simply a figure from her past, someone whose actions had shaped part of her journey, but no longer held power over her present or future. Her assistant knocked lightly on the doorframe. "The Stevenson Foundation representatives are here for your meeting." "Thank you, Daniel. I'll be right out." Before leaving her office, Amber glanced once more at the article, then deliberately closed the newspaper and placed it in her recycling bin. Whatever happened to Alexander now, whether he found peace in his final months or continued manipulating those around him until the end, was no longer her concern. Her life had taken a different path, one constructed through intentional choices, meaningful work, and authentic connections. The woman who had once been Amber Wright, supportive wife and unwitting victim, had transformed through trauma and recovery into someone entirely new, stronger certainly, but also more compassionate, more discerning, and more genuinely herself than she had ever been during her marriage. As she walked into the conference room to greet the potential donors, Amber carried with her not the weight of betrayal, but the wisdom it had ultimately given her, the hard-earned understanding that fractures, when acknowledged and integrated rather than concealed, often become the most authentic and powerful aspects of one's identity. Like the Japanese kintsugi bowl she had featured in her exhibition, broken, then mended with gold to highlight rather than hide its damage, Amber had emerged from her experience not merely repaired, but transformed. The fractures remained visible, golden seams of experience that had become integral to her strength and beauty, and in that transformation lay the most profound revenge of all, not the destruction of her betrayer, but her own magnificent recreation. Did this story awaken something in you? How about continuing with us on this journey filled with emotion and inspiration? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and don't miss the chance to explore stories that might change the way you see the world. A new video is already waiting for you. Click now and we'll meet you there.